Hey guys, welcome back to the Red Bed. Today I've lined up over 3 hours of real-life Reddit stories for you to relax with, whether you're falling asleep, chilling, or just want some background noise. And while you listen, I'll be sharing some chill, hardcore gameplay I got today, where I spend most of the time gathering materials and building my new base, which I'm trying to make it like a Roman-style temple, so I'm pretty excited to see where this goes. Also, I'm trying to post these videos daily, so if you're enjoying them, consider dropping a sub. But anyways, kick back, relax, and enjoy. This first story is about someone who went to the park for a quiet lunch break, only to be mistaken for a long-lost relative and swept straight into a full-on family reunion. I headed to the park that afternoon with nothing more on my mind than eating my sandwich in peace. It had been one of those mornings where work just drained me, and I thought a quiet spot under a shady tree might be the reset I needed. I spotted a bench, set myself down, and unwrapped my sandwich. Everything felt calm. The breeze was light, the chatter of people in the distance was soft, and I was just halfway through my meal when things took a turn. Out of nowhere, a cheerful older man strolled up. He had this big grin on his face, like he'd been looking for me. He pointed straight at me and said, "There you are. We thought you weren't coming." Before I could even get a word out, he was motioning to a whole group of people across the lawn. Within seconds, I was surrounded. A crowd of strangers closed in around me, hugging me, clapping me on the shoulder, and saying things like, "You haven't changed a bit," and "It's been way too long." Someone even pressed a paper plate into my hands, piled high with ribs, corn on the cob, and a big juicy slice of watermelon. Here's the thing, I am not great at correcting people in awkward situations. I freeze up when I feel like I'll embarrass someone, and in that moment, with all these smiling faces treating me like family, I just went with it. Instead of trying to explain, I leaned into it. Before I knew it, I was in the middle of what turned out to be a full-blown family reunion. People were catching me up on inside jokes I didn't understand, pointing out kids and telling me who their parents were, even whispering about old family drama like I'd been in on it from the start. At one point, this guy who looked about my age pulled me aside. He gave me this serious look and said, "Didn't think you'd actually show after last time." I had no idea what last time meant, but I nodded like it all made sense and said, "Yeah, you know how it goes." He nodded back, satisfied, and we both just stood there like we'd shared some deep, unspoken truth. The afternoon rolled on, and I ended up doing everything from joining in a tug-of-war match to posing for group photos. People were calling me over to different picnic tables, loading up my plate, and insisting I visit more often. It was like I'd been absorbed into their family history without question. By the time I finally made my way out, they sent me off with hugs and leftover dessert. Someone shoved a container of peach cobbler into my hands, and I swear it was the best cobbler I've ever had. As I walked away, they all waved like we'd definitely see each other again next summer. To this day, I have absolutely no clue which family adopted me for those few hours. But I'll tell you this, for a quiet lunch break that turned into the strangest reunion of my life, it was surprisingly one of the best afternoons I've ever stumbled into. That's where the story ends. That's such a funny kind of chaos to fall into. Imagine showing up for a sandwich and leaving with hugs, photos, and peach cobbler. The best part is how smoothly they just accepted the stranger as one of their own. Honestly, sometimes the most random accidents turn into the most memorable stories. This next story is about someone whose ex tried to humiliate them by giving out their phone number in a disgusting way, only for them to flip the script with a Tinder revenge plan that left him deleting everything. A few years ago, I was dating this guy who, in hindsight, really wasn't worth my time. He was the textbook definition of a deadbeat boyfriend. No job, no ambition, still living at home with his parents, and not showing the slightest interest in doing anything to change his situation. At first, I overlooked it because sometimes when you're dating, you want to believe people will grow. But after just a couple of months, it was obvious he wasn't going to change. So I dumped him. He didn't take it well. Some people move on, but not him. He sulked, he threw little digs my way, and eventually, he decided to get petty. At the time, I didn't know just how far he was willing to go. One night, I was home on the couch, Netflix on, snacks nearby, just relaxing. My phone rang. Normally, I don't answer unknown numbers, but something told me to pick up. I answered, and there was a man's voice on the other end. He asked if it was me. I said, "Depends. Who's calling?" Then he said something that made my stomach flip. He told me that my ex had given him my number. According to him, my ex told him I'd be down for a good time. I was stunned into silence for a second, and then he went on. He said he'd even asked my ex multiple times if he was sure, because it seemed too good to be true. But my ex apparently swore up and down that I was available for $100. He actually asked me point blank, "So is 100 okay?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My ex had given my number to some random man and told him I was selling myself. I felt violated, humiliated, and honestly furious. I snapped at the guy, told him to get lost, and hung up. My hands were shaking from anger. In that moment, I wanted to call my ex and scream at him, but then I stopped myself. I knew him well enough to know that my anger would only fuel him. He'd take pleasure in knowing he had gotten under my skin. So I tried to brush it off and told myself it was probably just a one-time thing. Unfortunately, I was wrong. The very next night, I got another call. This time, the voice on the other end was an older man. So old, he sounded like he could have been somebody's grandfather. And apparently, my ex had lowered the so-called price from 100 to 50. That detail made my blood boil. It wasn't just disgusting, it was degrading. I realized this wasn't going to stop. If I didn't do something, he'd keep spreading my number and turning my life into a nightmare. That's when the idea for Payback came to me. It wasn't mature, it wasn't responsible, and it definitely wasn't the most legal thing I've ever done. But I was angry, and I wanted him to feel the same humiliation he had just handed to me. So I went on Tinder and made a profile with his photos. Not mine, his. I uploaded a few pictures of him, the ones I knew he'd hate being used that way. Then I filled in the bio. I wrote something along the lines of, "Nice man seeking a woman to spoil and pamper. No strings attached. I've got money to spare and loads of it. If you're looking for financial help, hit me up." And then, to finish it off, I added his real phone number. To make sure people knew it was legitimate, I even linked his Facebook account. I didn't have to wait long. Within hours, I had a flood of messages coming into the account. Women were interested, asking about him, wanting details. I didn't reply to any of them. That wasn't the point. The point was for people to move on from Tinder and reach out to him directly. His phone number was right there. His Facebook was right there. I let the profile sit and just imagined what his phone must have looked like, buzzing nonstop with people reaching out. I didn't know exactly what was happening on his end, but I knew the flood of attention would be overwhelming. About a week later, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to check in and see how things had gone. I called his phone from a blocked number. To my satisfaction, the line didn't even ring. It went straight to the "This number has been changed" or "disconnected" message. That alone was enough to make me laugh out loud. Then I checked Facebook. His profile was gone. Deleted. In less than a week, he had been forced to change his number and shut down his social media. My petty little Tinder stunt had completely derailed his online presence. Was it immature? Definitely. Was it wrong? Probably. But in that moment, I didn't feel guilty. Not even a little. Because here's the thing. He started it. He gave out my number. He humiliated me. He had random men calling me, treating me like an object, and thinking it was funny. I just turned his own game back on him, and it hit him even harder. Every once in a while, I still think back on it, and every time I do, I feel that same maniacal little spark of glee. That's where this story ends. That revenge was both ruthless and clever. He wanted to play games with her number, and she flipped it so the exact same thing happened to him, but worse. It's wild how quickly his life unraveled once the attention was turned his way. Honestly, that's the kind of payback that sticks with you. This next story is about an office supervisor who demanded that her team give detailed reasons every time they stepped away from their desks, only to regret it when they took her literally. I work in a call center type job. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills. Most of the time, the work itself is pretty repetitive. You're on the phone, you're answering customer questions, you're logging notes in the system, and then you're doing it all again with the next person. The thing that makes it bearable is the team, a group of people who all understood each other's rhythms and had built up systems over the years that kept things running smoothly without much drama. One of those systems was simple but effective. We had a Microsoft Teams chat for our group. We used it for everything, asking a quick question, flagging down help, giving updates, or letting people know we were stepping away from the desk for a few minutes. And for as long as anyone could remember, The universal shorthand for stepping away was just 3 letters. BRB. Be right back. That was it. Nothing more, nothing less. It told your coworkers exactly what they needed to know. You weren't at your desk, but you'd be back shortly. For years, that system worked perfectly. Nobody questioned it. Nobody tried to complicate it. It was one of those rare things in a workplace where everyone quietly agreed, this is good enough. But then we got a new supervisor, and with her, everything changed. This supervisor wasn't promoted because she was particularly good at the job. Everyone knew it, even if nobody said it out loud in meetings. She got the role because she was close friends with the boss. They had this strange dynamic where she would spend half her time at work giving him advice on his love life. It was one of those classic promoted for all the wrong reasons situations. And as soon as she got the role, she felt like she had to start throwing her weight around. One of the very first things she decided to fix was our BRB system. She pulled each of us aside, one by one, and had these little conversations that all followed the same script. She'd tell us that typing just BRB wasn't good enough anymore. According to her, we needed to be more transparent. We had to state exactly why we were leaving our desks. Not just BRB, but BRB bathroom, or BRB coffee, or whatever else. When she got to me, I pushed back gently. I said, I don't know about this. I'm not really comfortable announcing to the whole team every time I need to go to the bathroom. She shrugged like it was no big deal and said, it's the rule. We need transparency so I know what everyone's doing. It made no sense. We had never had a problem before. Nobody was abusing the system. Nobody was wandering off for hours at a time. But because she wanted to assert control, we were all stuck with this new rule. So I decided, fine. If she wanted specifics, I'd give specifics. The very next time I had to use the bathroom, I didn't just type BRB. I wrote in the chat, BRB, going to go poop in the bathroom. Almost instantly, I got a private message from her. She said, that's not professional. I wrote back, you told us to be specific. I'm being specific. She didn't have much of a comeback, and that was the moment the floodgates opened. My coworkers saw what I had typed, and they thought it was hilarious. They joined in almost immediately. Suddenly, every time someone had to step away, they were writing the most absurd, overly detailed reasons they could think of. A few of my favorites, BRB, going to stand in front of the urinal and do an impression of a water fountain. BRB, off to blow my nose to try to dislodge this giant booger. BRB, heading to the vending machine to argue with it when it inevitably eats my dollar. BRB, going to make coffee so strong it could power a small car. Every day, the chat filled with more ridiculous updates. What used to be a boring space for simple communication turned into pure entertainment. We'd be quietly taking calls, then glance at the chat and try not to laugh out loud when someone announced their next mission. Of course, our supervisor didn't find it funny. She had wanted control, not chaos. But she couldn't really say anything, because technically we were following her rule. She was the one who said to be specific. She was the one who insisted on full transparency. We were simply giving her exactly what she asked for. It didn't take long for her to realize her mistake. Within a week, she quietly backed down. She didn't make a formal announcement. She didn't admit she had been wrong. Instead, she just started pulling people aside again, saying we didn't need to be that specific after all. A simple BRB would be fine. And just like that, we went back to the old system. Short, efficient, problem-free. The rule she had tried to enforce was gone almost as quickly as it arrived, undone by her own inability to think it through, and by a team who decided to take her literally until she couldn't take it anymore. The funny thing is, all of this could have been avoided if she had just left things the way they were. For years, nobody had ever abused the BRB system. It worked because everyone trusted each other enough to keep it simple. The only reason it turned into a circus was because she tried to fix something that wasn't broken. And the lesson she walked away with, hopefully, was that when you impose pointless rules, people will find a way to make you regret it. That's the end of this story. This one's hilarious because it shows exactly how bad micromanagement can backfire. The rule was unnecessary, and the team handled it in the best way possible, by following it so literally that it became a joke. Honestly, it's kind of poetic that all it took was a week of oversharing before she realized the old system was better. This next story is about a friend who had years of their shows, games, and movies spoiled by the same people, and finally got revenge by dropping a spoiler right back at them. I've been in the same friend group since high school. It's a mix of different personalities, but two of the guys have always been exactly the same, even as we've gotten older. Everyone in the group is geeky in one way or another. For me, it's more casual. I like shows, games, and movies, but I also like to go outside and not let media completely run my life. For them, it's the full-on superfan lifestyle. They're the kind of people who buy merch, hang out on fan forums, and go to midnight premieres. Again, nothing wrong with that, but the way they consume things so fast has always set me up for the same problem: spoilers. Whenever I'd mentioned that I was watching a new show, or starting a game, or excited about a sequel, they'd already finished it. Every time. And they could never resist making some kind of comment. Sometimes they'd just say, "That second season was terrible," or "That game isn't worth it." Other times they'd do this coy little smirk and drop a hint that seemed harmless to everyone else but gave away everything to me. If I said I liked a certain character, they'd make a joke, in a tone that made it obvious that character didn't make it. If they casually mentioned a fan theory nickname, I could piece together what the twist was going to be. It wasn't clever and it wasn't fun. It was just ruining things for me before I got to experience them myself. Every time they did it, I'd tell them to knock it off. And every single time, they'd deny it. They'd say, "I wasn't spoiling anything," or "You don't even know if that's what I meant." But of course it always was what they meant. I wasn't stupid, and they weren't nearly as sneaky as they thought. So this went on for years. Then finally, the perfect opportunity came around. One of them had just signed up for a new streaming service. He was excited because he wanted to watch a certain show. He said he had already seen the first season, but hadn't gotten to the second one yet. He even said no spoilers, like it was this big serious rule. I perked up right away, because I had actually seen the show. Another friend jumped in and said, "Yeah, the second season was really good." I decided to say something harmless, just to be part of the conversation. I said something like, "I loved how the setting looked in season 2, naming the fictional country that's literally been part of the backdrop since the beginning of the series. No plot points, no twists, just a general comment. But this guy immediately snapped at me. "Hey, no spoilers!" He gave me this stern look, like I'd crossed some sacred boundary. And that was it. That moment triggered something in me. It was like a switch flipped, and suddenly I remembered every single time he had spoiled something for me. Every smug grin, every coy remark, every time I'd been forced to connect dots I didn't want to connect. The hypocrisy of it was too much. I didn't even think. I just said, "What? That's not spoiling." I didn't even mention which one of those two characters died. Oh, oops. The room went silent. His face turned red. He got mad and huffy, acting like I had just committed some massive betrayal. Meanwhile, everyone else was caught between being annoyed at me and kind of entertained. They didn't exactly cheer, but you could tell they understood why I did it. The whole moment didn't last long. We moved on to other topics, and nothing major came from it. But for me, that second of Payback was perfect. After years of sitting through their spoilers, I finally got to flip the script. Was it petty? Absolutely. Do I regret it? Not at all. In fact, it felt like sweet relief. That story wraps up here. There's something funny about how one little comeback can balance years of annoyance. You can just feel how satisfying that must have been in the moment. It's petty, sure, but sometimes petty is exactly what makes it perfect. Honestly, I think most people in the group probably knew deep down he had it coming. This next story is about someone who had a boyfriend in high school who loved to fake spoil every book they read until they finally turned the tables with a real spoiler he never saw coming. Back in high school, books were everything to me. I was the kind of kid who always had one tucked under my arm, ready to crack it open the second there was a break in class, during lunch, or before band practice. I read constantly. Reading wasn't just a pastime. It was my comfort zone, my escape, my favorite way to spend time. And it's funny because when I got grounded, the usual punishments like losing TV time, not being allowed on the phone, or being sent to my room without dinner never really bothered me. Those weren't punishments at all. Not to me. The real punishment would have been if someone took away my books. That would have been devastating. To give you an idea of the time period, this was before the internet was anything like it is today. Back then, if you were online, it was usually through dial-up, and most people were just hanging around on bulletin board systems. Spoilers weren't this constant risk lurking around every corner the way they are now. Unless someone directly told you the ending of a story, you could pretty easily avoid finding out what happened. If you had to read a book for English class, Your only shortcut was to buy the Cliff's Notes or borrow them from someone who had a copy. So, in a way, high school was kind of a golden age for me as a reader. I could pick up a book, get lost in it, and not have to worry that someone online would casually drop the ending in a comment section or a tweet. But even back then, I still had one spoiler threat to deal with: my then boyfriend. He had this habit, one that he thought was hilarious but drove me absolutely crazy. Every single time he saw me with a book, no matter what it was, he'd lean over, smirk, and say the same thing: "They die in the end." That was his joke, over and over. He hadn't read the book, he didn't even know what the plot was about most of the time, but he thought it was the funniest thing in the world to mess with me like that. It worked too, in a way, because even though I knew he was just being annoying, a part of me always wondered if maybe this time he was right. What if this book actually did end that way? What if his dumb joke wasn't a joke at all? That tiny bit of doubt would hang in the back of my head while I read. He never actually guessed right, but the fact that he could plant that thought was enough to ruin a little of the fun for me. This went on for a while, and I mostly just rolled my eyes at it. But then one day, I saw my chance for payback. He was reading a book for his English class, Arthur Miller's The Crucible. Not only had I already read it, but I'd also seen the play performed. I knew the entire story backward and forward. I knew the characters, the themes, and yes, the ending. So when I saw him with that book, I walked up casually, glanced down, and in the exact same offhand tone he always used with me, I said, "Oh, they die in the end." Then I laughed, just like he always laughed when he did it to me. He and his friends thought it was hilarious. They cracked up, thinking I was just turning his own joke back on him. They didn't think for a second that I was being serious, or that I actually knew the ending. To them, it was just me playing along, doing the same fake spoiler routine that he had been pulling on me since we started dating. And in that moment, I let them believe that. I didn't correct them, didn't say a word about already having read it. I just let it sit there. About 2 weeks later, I got my reward. He came running up to me, completely upset, waving his book around. His face was red, and he was actually angry. "They died! Why would you tell me the end?" he shouted at me, as if I had committed some huge betrayal. I just looked at him, probably with the same smirk he had always given me, and pointed out that I had done the exact same thing he always did to me. The only difference was, this time, I actually knew the story. I never told him I had read it, never said I'd seen it performed. I had just copied his line back at him, and by pure chance, or maybe poetic justice, it happened to be true. The irony was perfect. For weeks, months even, he had thought it was hilarious to mess with me by pretending to spoil things. And the first time I threw it back at him, he realized how awful it actually felt. Suddenly it wasn't funny anymore. He was genuinely mad, and that only made it funnier to me. After that, he never pulled the "they die in the end" stunt again. Not once. The joke was dead in the water. He knew what it felt like now, and he didn't want to risk me doing it again. Looking back on it years later, I can't help but laugh. At the time, I didn't think much beyond enjoying that little victory. But now, I can see it as one of those moments where the power dynamic flipped. Even just for a second. He was the one who loved to get under my skin, and in the end, he couldn't handle a taste of his own medicine. Of course, we broke up later on, and back then it felt like the end of the world. I was heartbroken, but 30 years down the line, I can look back and see the bigger picture. That relationship wasn't healthy. He was emotionally manipulative and not the kind of person who respected me in the ways that mattered. So that one small victory, spoiling the crucible for him, feels even sweeter now, because it reminds me that even in a relationship where I didn't always feel in control, I still had moments where I stood my ground. It was petty, sure, but it was the kind of petty that felt like justice, and it was enough to make him think twice about messing with me again. That's where the story ends. There's something really satisfying about how that played out. It's such a simple line, but it carried years of built-up frustration right back at him. What makes it even better is that he thought you were joking at first, only to get completely blindsided later. It's one of those little reminders that sometimes the best payback is just letting the truth do the work. This next story is about a young library page who was publicly shamed by a circulation supervisor and who quietly served a little, perfectly proportionate revenge the next time the supervisor missed damaged items himself. I worked in libraries for 17 years before becoming disabled, but this story reaches back to when I was about 19 or 20 and working as a page. One of our core duties was checking in returned items. If a returned book had any damage, we were supposed to fill out a small form and place the item and the form on a shelf for circulation staff to evaluate. The circulation team would then decide whether to bill the patron or take another action. One afternoon, the circulation supervisor, let's call him K, found an item in the library with some water damage that had been missed at check-in. Our system recorded which employee last processed each item. So K ran the record and discovered that I had been the person who had checked the book in. The damage was minor, slight rippling to the pages and a faint water stain on the inside cover. It was the kind of thing that was easy to miss when you were scanning returns by the cartload. I don't mind feedback. I'm the sort of person who takes correction and tries to get better. What stung was how Kay handled it. Instead of pulling me aside discreetly, he chose to call me out in front of the whole branch staff while we were standing by the back door, waiting to be dismissed at the end of the day. He said my name loudly and pointed out the missed damage, and did it in a tone that was rude and publicly shaming. Kay wasn't even my direct supervisor. He worked circulation, not pages, but he made a spectacle anyway. Being embarrassed in front of coworkers is a strange physical sensation. My face went warm, my hands felt a little unsteady, and I remember the little knot of anger that tightened in my chest. We worked in a place that usually ran on quiet routines and small, polite exchanges. This felt theatrical and unnecessary. I resented the performance, especially because the damage really was easy to miss during a busy shift. After that, I simmered. I could have gone to HR or asked to speak privately with Kay's manager, but I decided instead to plan a small bit of payback. Something petty and harmless that would give him a taste of his own medicine without causing real damage. I knew the rhythm of the place and the weak points in the system, and I also knew that circulation staff occasionally helped pages with check-in when we were short-handed. Kay, being the circulation supervisor, was often the one who got pulled into that rota. A few days later, when I was on check-in duty and we were slammed with carts of returns, I noticed a book with significantly worse water damage than the one Kay had found on me. The pages were warped and stuck together in places. The cover had a dark ring, and the spine was soft from water exposure. It had clearly suffered from a spill and belonged in the damaged items bin. I nonchalantly dropped it into the return slot the way patrons do when they deposit items after hours. About an hour later, I went into the back processing room and found the damaged volume sitting on a cart marked for shelving. It had been missed, and someone would need to process it properly. Our computer system recorded the employee who had checked it in, and when I looked it up, it showed that Kay himself had scanned the item. He'd been the one who missed it. I waited. I didn't announce anything. I let the subtle gears of the library do their work, watching the clock for the moment when circulation staff would gather for the shift change, which was the only time Kay and all the employees he supervised were in the same area. When that brief lobby of bodies and faces formed, I wiped my hands on my apron, walked over, and said, loud enough for half a dozen of his direct reports to hear, "Hey Kay, I just found this badly damaged book on a shelving cart, and it looks like you're the one who checked it in. Just thought you should know." The expression on his face was a cocktail of surprise, irritation, and a tiny pinch of the shame he'd visited upon me days earlier. It was satisfying in a way that was more about balance than vengeance. My tone was even, not triumphant. I wanted the point to land without escalating. For the people watching, his staff, a few pages, and the desk clerks, the irony was immediate and visible. The room's mood shifted from the usual end-of-day chatter to a quiet, slightly amused attention. People laugh at petty stories because they recognize the small human impulse behind them, a desire to restore dignity when someone has publicly stripped it away. That doesn't make the action noble, but it made sense to me in the moment. The rest of my career with Kay didn't become a reenactment of that day. We kept working together for another decade and a half, and our interactions were professional, sometimes frosty, sometimes cordial. When Kay rubbed a coworker the wrong way in the years that followed, and that happened fairly often, someone else would inevitably lean over and tell the tale of the damaged book. It became a quiet little anecdote passed around when morale flagged, or when a supervisor needed a reminder about tact. The satisfaction I felt was not gloating. It was the cool, private relief that comes after a small injustice is addressed in a proportionate, clever way. I never said anything about the earlier incident in front of him. I let the facts do the talking, and I never sabotaged his work or tried to harm him. I simply pointed out the obvious, which was that this time the missed damage had his name attached to it. In the long run, it's one of those moments that taught me about boundaries and dignity in the workplace. You can't control everyone's behavior, but you can choose how you respond when you're put in a position that feels unfair. The petty revenge was a brief punctuation mark, a private corrective that let me walk out of the branch door without that tight, burning feeling in my chest. It didn't change the system, and it didn't change Kay, but it returned a sliver of balance to my day. That story stops there. There's something satisfying about balance being restored in such a small, clever way. A public call-out can feel humiliating and disproportionate, and moments like this show how a subtle, well-timed pushback can shift the dynamic without spiraling into cruelty. What makes it land is the restraint, the choice to mirror the treatment just enough to highlight the irony, not to cause lasting harm. Stories like these linger because they serve as a reminder that even in routine workplaces, dignity matters, and sometimes the lightest correction can leave the strongest impression. This next story is about a lab intern who dealt with a condescending group leader by turning the tables on him in the most confusing and unexpected way. Back when I was working as an unpaid intern in a lab, waiting for my PhD program to start in another city, there was a group leader in a neighboring lab who made everything more difficult than it needed to be. He had this cold, smug way of acting, and for some reason he reminded me of Odo from Deep Space Nine. So, in my head, that's what I called him, Odo. My boss and Odo were friendly enough, so when she needed me to borrow a plasmid from his lab, I figured it wouldn't be a big deal. For anyone unfamiliar, a plasmid is a little circle of DNA. You put it into bacteria, and it basically forces them to do two things: make a protein and resist an antibiotic. It sounds clever, but bacteria are stubborn little creatures. If you give them a plasmid that asks too much of them, like forcing them to make a protein they don't like, they'll fight back. They can actually rip out the antibiotic resistance gene, stitch it into their own DNA, and then ditch the plasmid altogether. When that happens, they stop making the protein, and when you try to recover the plasmid, you get back nothing. If you're smart, you use a special strain of bacteria that can't pull that trick. That detail is important. Anyway, I only needed a few microliters of this plasmid from Odo, just a tiny bit. He was difficult from the start and only gave me a third of what I asked for. I tried using it, but the bacteria rejected it, and when I checked the results, there was nothing. No plasmid, no resistance, nothing. Instead of considering that something might be wrong with his material, Odo acted like I was incompetent. He actually handed me some of his own stock of bacteria that were supposedly resistant. I grew them up, tried purifying the plasmid again, and once again got nothing but water. When I told him, he refused to believe me. He demanded proof. For days, I went back and forth collecting the data he wanted until I could finally show him, without question, that there was no plasmid in those bacteria. Only then, grudgingly, did he give me a fresh DNA sample from his private stash. And wouldn't you know it, that one worked perfectly. The cells resisted the antibiotic, the plasmid was intact, and everything functioned the way it was supposed to. That's when it clicked. The big, clever group leader, with all his experience, had made a rookie mistake. He had used the wrong strain of bacteria. His bacteria had ditched the difficult part of the plasmid, kept the antibiotic resistance for themselves, and left him with nothing but confusion. And I, the so-called useless intern, had spotted it. Once I had the right strain, everything went smoothly. I grew up a whole batch, prepped multiple tubes of top-quality DNA, and could have just left it at that. Part of me thought about letting him struggle with his own mistake until he figured it out. But then another thought hit me. Why not do something he'd never expect? So I walked right into his lab one afternoon. I didn't announce myself or try to start a conversation. I just breezed in, set down a tube of 50 microliters of freshly prepared DNA, along with a plate of the correct bacteria, and breezed right back out. I gave him everything he needed to fix his problem indefinitely. No explanations, no strings attached. Just dropped it off and left. A few days later, something interesting happened. His wife, who also worked in the lab and was just as unpleasant as he was, suddenly congratulated me on my upcoming PhD position. It might have seemed like nothing on the surface, but I realized it meant my plan had worked. From talking to others, I pieced together what had happened behind the scenes. Apparently, after I dropped off that gift in his lab, Odo went to my boss, utterly confused. He couldn't figure out why I'd been nice to him. His first assumption was that I must have wanted something from him. Maybe I was fishing for a job. But my boss explained that I already had a highly desirable PhD position lined up and wouldn't need anything from him. That only made him more bewildered. He was left spinning, trying to understand why I'd gone out of my way to help him when there was no benefit to me at all. And that was the beauty of it. I didn't help him because I wanted anything. I helped him precisely because it would leave him scratching his head, wondering what my angle was. I wish I could have seen the look on his face when he realized I was just nice to him, for no reason. That's what made it sting the most. That's where the story ends. I love how clever that was. Instead of fighting back or holding a grudge, they flipped the script completely. There's something hilarious about the idea of leaving someone so petty, absolutely baffled, just by being unexpectedly generous. It's the kind of move that doesn't just win, it leaves the other person second-guessing themselves for ages. This next story is about a retail worker who snapped back at a rude, hateful customer at the key duplication counter and chose an unexpected way to make him feel the consequences of his actions. I used to work at a hardware store that offered a key duplication service. The key booth sat off to one side of the shop with clear signs telling customers to find an employee for assistance or ring the bell, because we didn't keep someone stationed there all the time. One humid June afternoon in 2021, a man marched straight back to the key counter and started yelling before I'd even finished the walk across the store. "Hey, hey, hey, is anyone going to do their job?" he shouted. It was one of those tones that tries to bend a room to the sound of your fury. I sighed, headed over, and tried to keep my voice even. He was impatient and rude from the start, wanting 6 different keys copied twice each. He made a fuss when I asked him to remove each key from the ring for the machine, acting like it was my fault that the process required handling them one at a time. Eventually, I took the keys from him because arguing would have been wasted energy. I'd already come into work ready to do the job. As I worked the duplicator, he kept up a running commentary about how pointless the service was if no one was standing there watching. I apologized, only because it's cheaper to do that than to escalate, and tried to maintain a neutral, professional routine. When the duplicates were finished, I bagged them up and handed them over, ready to move on. Then, just as I was finishing, I heard a couple of customers down one of the aisles talking about Pride and whether it was this weekend or next. Milliseconds later, the man at the counter craned his neck toward the aisle and started screaming down it. He called those customers names and launched into a tirade, using hateful language directed at them because they might have been celebrating Pride. It was loud and ugly, and it made everyone near the front of the store go quiet. He used slurs and aimed to shame them openly. You could feel the temperature in the shop drop. He didn't stop with the insult. He turned to me, loud and pointed, and said I was somehow failing him by not joining his display of contempt. He insisted I was not upholding whatever twisted standard he'd decided applied there and then. I was taken aback. The man expected me not only to tolerate his behavior, but to become complicit in it. I'm not a confrontational person by habit. In retail, you learn to pick your battles and let go of the rest. But there's a difference between tolerating rudeness toward me and letting someone hurl abuse at other customers and expecting me to validate it. The furthest I'd gone before was telling someone to calm down or calling for a manager. This was different. He'd crossed into active harassment and he wanted me to sign on. So I made a quick, calculated decision. The combination of his entitlement, his public hostility, and the way he'd try to drag me into it made me feel sick. I decided to deny him the tidy outcome he expected. Instead of giving him perfect duplicates and letting him walk away triumphant, I took every duplicate I just made for him and every key remaining on his ring to the grinder, and I ground them down until they were unusable. I left the Audi key fob intact, partly so his car would still start and he could get himself out of the parking lot, but I made the rest of the set useless. Then I told him, without rancor but with enough edge that it landed, that since I'd taken the time to walk over and help him, the damaged keys would be on the house. That phrase, "on the house," was both literal and deliberate. He had no return to make. The duplicates were ruined and the original ring sabotaged. He could fume and make threats, but there was no plausible way to claim a refund for broken goods he demanded be made during his fit of self-importance. There's a little voice in the back of my head that still asks whether I went too far. Retail teaches you to bend and swallow 100 small humiliations a week. My impulse was usually to keep my paycheck and my shred of calm, even when customers were awful. This time the offense was different. It was hateful and performative, and it asked me to join in. I couldn't stomach that. My choice was petty, yes, and irreversible, but it was also immediate and satisfying in the sense that the man's power to make other people feel small was interrupted. He shoved the ruined keyring and the ruined duplicates back at me, face red and sputtering accusations. He tried to demand I fix them. I reminded him of what had happened and that I'd done him a favor. No charge. He sputtered more, called me names, and stomped out. The two customers in the aisle returned, visibly shaken, but quietly grateful that somebody had not joined in the harassment. A couple other patrons nodded at me or gave a little thumbs up, small gestures that said they saw what had happened and were on my side. Afterward, I called my manager and explained the situation. I didn't hide what I'd done. This was the kind of action that could have consequences, and I wanted to own it. My manager's reaction was a slow, stunned silence, and then, unexpectedly, approval. He wasn't thrilled about property damage or the risk of a complaint, but he understood context and escalation. Corporate was notified, and we filed an incident report. No formal discipline came down. Instead, the manager told me privately he'd back me up if anyone tried to make a big stink. I don't tell the story like it's a heroic battle cry. I tell it like a memory that still sits in my chest. Bright, complicated, and a little uncomfortable. I made a decision in a pressured moment to deny a bully the satisfaction of making people feel small, and I did it by wrecking property he expected me to hand back to him. It felt like instant justice, and also risky and reckless. I'll live with the consequences of that choice, but I don't regret standing up for the customers he'd targeted. That's where the story ends. This one captures how quickly an everyday retail interaction can tip into something uglier. The choice to quietly sabotage the keys was definitely risky, but it also flipped the script on someone who had been trying to dominate the room with anger. What makes it stand out is the balance between pettiness and principle, a small act that undercut the customer's power without escalating into a larger conflict. It's a reminder that even in routine jobs, people sometimes reach a breaking point and respond in unexpected ways to restore a sense of control. This next story is about a teenager who grew up with step-siblings who constantly rejected and bullied her, and now feels secretly relieved when she learns they'll never be coming back home. I'm 15 now, but my life has felt complicated for as long as I can remember. My dad remarried when I was 3, not long after my mom died. I don't have any real memories of her, just stories and photos people share. So in my mind, my stepmom was always the mother figure I knew. When she came into our lives, she already had 2 kids from her previous marriage, a boy and a girl who were a few years older than me. On paper, it probably looked like a blended family coming together. In reality, it felt like stepping into a storm. From the very beginning, my step-siblings didn't like me or my dad. I was too little to understand why at first, but their attitude was always sharp. They ignored me, rolled their eyes at me, or whispered things to each other when they thought I wasn't listening. As I got older, it became clearer. They didn't want me as a sister, and they definitely didn't want my dad as their stepdad. They even said cruel things about my mom, a woman they'd never known, and those words stuck in my chest for years. Imagine being a kid and hearing older children talk badly about the mom you lost. It's a sting you can't easily describe. Things really spiraled when I was around 7 or 8. Their dad, who had always been cold and openly hostile toward my dad, decided he wasn't going to let my stepmom have them back anymore. The way he spoke to my dad during exchanges was like ice. Clipped words, no eye contact, sometimes full-on insults. It was tense, even for me as a little kid watching from the back seat. My stepmom had to call the police and go to court just to enforce the custody agreement. The court told him he had to follow the plan, but each time she got them back for a short visit, as soon as they returned to their dad, he would say no again. Those brief weeks we did get with them, they were absolute nightmares for me. They'd glare at me across the dinner table, mutter insults under their breath, and sometimes tell me directly that I deserved to be bullied. Looking back now, it was like they took every bit of frustration they felt toward their parents' divorce and funneled it onto me. I remember feeling small in my own home. I'd sit in my room listening to music just to drown out their comments or wait for my dad to come home from work because he was the only one who made me feel safe when they were around. Their dad eventually sued for full custody, and my step-siblings told the judge they didn't want to live with me, my dad, or even our half-brother, who was just a baby then. The judge allowed them to stay with their dad, but ordered therapy sessions with my stepmom so they could maintain a connection. But their dad wouldn't enforce that either. So it turned into this long, drawn-out legal battle. The visits stopped altogether, and my stepmom carried a quiet heartbreak around the house. For years, it was this shadow in the background. Her missing kids, my missing peace of mind. When they turned 18, the court battles ended, and my stepmom finally got therapy with them. By then, though, so much damage had been done. It was like they lived in a separate world from us. We would get occasional updates through my stepmom, but I never heard from them directly. Part of me felt guilty for not caring more, but another part of me, a bigger part, felt relieved. Life at home became calmer. There was no more bracing myself for mean comments, no more tension at the dinner table. Then just a few weeks ago, my dad and stepmom sat me down for a serious talk. They told me my step-siblings would never be coming home again. Their dad had completely poisoned them against our family, they said, and the only relationship they wanted was with my stepmom. And even then, only if she kept them away from us. My stepmom's voice broke as she explained it. She'd always dreamed that once they were adults, they might come back to her, maybe even live with us for a while. I remember nodding while she talked, my stomach doing this weird flip of emotions. On the outside, I tried to look neutral, but inside, I felt this wave of relief wash over me. I didn't have to brace myself for their presence ever again. No more insults, no more being treated like an outsider in my own home. It was like a piece of my childhood anxiety finally loosened its grip, but I guess I wasn't hiding it as well as I thought. Over the last couple of weeks, it's become obvious to my stepmom that I'm not sad about this news. She's been looking at me with hurt in her eyes, and my dad even told me quietly that I should try to hide it better for her sake. But I can't. I'm not built that way. I've spent years being the quiet one, the one who absorbs everyone else's feelings. And now that it's finally over, my body just wants to exhale. I don't wish them harm. I don't sit around hoping bad things happen to them. But I can't pretend to be devastated that two people who rejected me, insulted my mom, and made me feel like a stranger in my own house are gone for good. I can't pretend to mourn a relationship that never really existed. When my stepmom looks sad, I feel bad for her. But it's not enough to erase the relief. Sometimes at night, I replay memories of them in my head. Not as a way to dwell, but as a reminder of why I feel this way. The time they laughed at me for crying after a nightmare. The time they told me my mom didn't love me enough to stay alive, which was one of the cruelest things anyone has ever said to me. The time they deliberately broke one of my favorite toys and smirked when I got upset. These things pile up. They shape how you feel about someone. So yeah, maybe I'm wrong for not hiding my feelings better, but I'm not wrong for having them. After years of tension, bullying, and rejection, I finally feel like my home is really my home. And that's not something I can easily apologize for. That's the end of the story. It's wild how complicated blended families can get. Sometimes you hear stories where everyone bonds, and it's heartwarming. But other times it's just constant tension that never really heals. I can't blame someone for feeling relief after living through that kind of rejection. It's one of those situations where multiple truths exist at once. Sadness for the parent, but relief for yourself. Hearing stuff like this makes me appreciate how layered family dynamics really are. This next story is about a woman dealing with drama at the extended stay motel where her parents live, including a controlling manager who thought she owned the place and stirred up conflict over handicap parking. So here's the latest, and honestly, it feels like a double update rolled into one. For anyone who missed it, my parents are living in an extended stay motel right now. It's not exactly glamorous, but it's their home for the time being, and they've made the best of it. The thing is, there's been a lot of tension around the place lately because of one person, a woman who I've been calling Miss B. She was the manager, and she acted like she owned not just the building, but the people inside of it too. I'll get into that in a second. But first, let me say why this update took so long. Between dealing with my own health issues, thanks to autoimmune disorders that flare up when they feel like it, and then my keyboard breaking down on me, plus some random internet problems, it's been a mess just trying to type this out. So, if it feels overdue, that's why. Anyway, one of the first things that really ticked me off happened when my mom called me and told me about this meeting they had. All of the residents were told that they were no longer allowed to hang out outside like they used to. For a lot of them, it was one of the only ways to socialize. People would sit out in front of their doors, chat with each other, and enjoy the fresh air. But suddenly, that was over. The new rule was that everyone had to stay inside their apartments, which are really just motel rooms, but calling them apartments makes it feel less temporary. If anyone had pets, they could take them out for bathroom breaks, but the second the pet was done, the owner had to go straight back inside. When I heard that, I was furious. It felt so obvious that this change came down because of Miss B. She had this habit of parking in handicap spots without the required tags or placards, and instead of owning up to it, she decided to clamp down on everyone else. It's like she thought if she kept people from gathering outside, she wouldn't have to face the heat for what she was doing. The power trip was unreal, but here's where things start to get better. My parents told me that one of their friends, Mr. Joey, managed to move into a better apartment. He'd been wanting a nicer space for a while, so it was a big relief for him. And then there's Miss Annabelle. She's been waiting forever for her house to be finished, and now it's finally almost ready. In just a couple of weeks, she should be able to move in. Knowing that she'll get to settle into a real home after waiting so long makes me happy for her. And the best part, the pièce de résistance, as my mom put it, is that Miss B no longer works there. That's right, she's out. Apparently, the district manager for the chain stepped in and is managing things until they find a replacement. From the sound of it, everyone's breathing a little easier now that she's gone. Without her power games and controlling rules, the atmosphere feels lighter. One more little detail that made me smile. If you park in a handicap spot now, without the proper tag or placard, you get a nice little note stuck on your windshield. It's not the same as a ticket, but it's enough to make people think twice before taking a spot that isn't theirs. Considering how much of the drama started around that issue, it feels like karma finally caught up in some small way. So yeah, this has been kind of a double update. The bad with the ridiculous rules, but also the good news about friends moving forward and the manager being replaced. Whether this is the final chapter or not, who knows? With how things have gone so far, I wouldn't be surprised if something else comes up. But at least for now, things are looking a whole lot better than they were before. That story ends there. It's funny how one person on a power trip can make life miserable for a whole group of people. But once they're out of the picture, everything just feels lighter. I like that the small wins, like Annabelle getting her house and those parking notes, are stacking up for everyone there. It almost feels like the community is getting its balance back. And honestly, hearing about the district manager stepping in makes me hope things stay calmer from here on out. This next story is about a mother who left her young son with her brother and sister-in-law, only to find out later that her sister-in-law had slapped him and then tried to justify it. I had a work conference last weekend, so I asked my brother and his wife to watch my 5-year-old son. They've babysat before, and while my sister-in-law and I don't exactly get along, I figured it would be fine for one night. My conference ran late, so I didn't pick him up until the next morning. On the drive home, I asked my son about his highlight and lowlight of the weekend. That's our little routine. I like hearing both the good and the bad. His highlight was simple enough, but his lowlight made my stomach drop. He told me very matter-of-factly, "She hit me on the face." I was stunned. I didn't even fully process it at first, but the second it sank in, I was livid. I swung the car around and drove straight back to my brother's place. When I confronted my sister-in-law, she didn't even bother to deny it. She admitted it outright and then started it on me, saying my son had been talking back and refused to eat the dinner she made for him. Somehow in her mind, that made slapping him acceptable. I tried to wrap my head around her reasoning, and it just got worse. She launched into a lecture about how he needs discipline, how I'm a bad mother, and how kids these days are too soft. Meanwhile, my brother sat there in silence, like a spectator. When I raised my voice in anger, he looked at me like I was the one overreacting. Then she crossed a line I'll never forget. She said that because my son is fatherless, he needs extra punishment to grow up right. My son's dad isn't in the picture. But to throw that in my face, and in his for that matter, was beyond cruel. She sat there with this self-righteous air, acting like she was doing me a favor. She doesn't work. She wraps herself in this pseudo-traditional image, and suddenly she thinks she has the authority to parent my child better than I do. At that point, I lost it. I started yelling, swearing, and calling her every name I could think of. My son was still in the room, and I hate that he had to see me like that, but I couldn't hold it in. I told her flat out she would never see us again. I told my brother he was pathetic for letting her get away with it. I stormed out, my son clinging to my hand, and I didn't look back. Later, though, I regretted the words I used. I had unloaded a bunch of insults on her, things I probably shouldn't have said. And now that's what my brother and even my mom are focusing on. They're acting like my language and my temper were the problem, not the fact that she slapped a 5-year-old. My mom even called me and said that while my sister-in-law shouldn't have hit him, I should still be grateful that she watched him in the first place. I couldn't believe it. Grateful? That gratitude went straight out the window the second she laid hands on my son and called him fatherless. Now I feel like I'm stuck in this twisted situation where I'm being painted as the bad guy, just because I reacted strongly. But honestly, what else was I supposed to do? If someone hits my child, I'm not going to just nod and thank them for dinner. I don't regret standing up for my son. I only regret that the focus shifted to my yelling instead of the real issue. But in my heart, I know what matters most. My son knows I have his back, and he'll never be left alone with her again. That story wraps up here. This one hits hard because the real focus should have stayed on the fact that a grown adult slapped a little kid. It's wild how quickly families can twist things around and make the reaction the bigger issue. I think most people listening would agree that standing up like that was natural. It just shows how messy family loyalty can get when people don't want to face the truth. This next story is about someone whose mom demanded their social security card without explaining why, sparking suspicion and frustration when they refused to hand it over. The whole week had already been tense between me and my mom. We'd had an argument earlier, and instead of working it out, things just lingered in silence. I wasn't in the mood for another round of back and forth, so I'd been keeping to myself, giving her the quiet treatment more than anything. The atmosphere in the house felt heavy. You know when everyone is walking around on edge, pretending everything is fine, but you can feel the weight of something unsaid in every room? That's what it felt like. So when she came out of nowhere and asked me to give her my social security card, it caught me completely off guard. There wasn't any buildup, no explanation, just the sudden demand. My first reaction was instinctive. I told her no, not because I wanted to be difficult, but because it was strange to be asked for something that important without any context. She pressed me again, asking for it one more time, and I asked her why. Why did she need my social security card? What was it for? She didn't answer. She didn't even try. She just looked at me for a moment, turned around and walked away. No conversation, no clarity, just silence. At that point, I didn't think much more about it. I went back to what I was doing upstairs, working on my own stuff, and trying not to let the whole situation bother me. But later, when I came downstairs to make some food, she brought it up again. I was just focused on making a bowl of oatmeal, because I was hungry and wanted something warm. But suddenly, we were back in the same loop. This time, she asked why I was being snippy when she had only asked me for my social security card. I told her exactly what was on my mind. The reason I said no was because she never explained what she needed it for. To me, that seemed fair. I wasn't raising my voice. I wasn't being disrespectful. I was just pointing out that you don't hand over something like that without knowing why. Her response, though, floored me. She said, "If I wanted to use your social security number for something bad, I would have done it without asking you." I stood there with my spoon in my hand, half stirring my oatmeal, and thought, wow, that's supposed to make me feel better? Because it didn't. In fact, it made me trust her even less. If anything, it sounded more like a threat than reassurance. The whole time, I stayed mostly quiet. I wasn't in the mood to escalate things. I gave her short responses, things like no or what do you need it for, but nothing else. She, on the other hand, kept circling back to how I was the one making it into a big deal. She said I was overreacting, that she shouldn't have to walk on eggshells every time she asked me for something, and that I was being rude for no reason. But from my perspective, I was doing the opposite. I was keeping calm, not raising my voice, not throwing insults, not picking a fight. I just wanted to know why she needed it, and since she wouldn't say, I wasn't going to hand it over. That was it. It felt like common sense. Her lecture went on for a while. It wasn't even an argument at that point, just her talking with these long pauses in between, like she expected me to jump in and apologize. But I didn't. I didn't see a reason to. The pauses just dragged out the conversation, and all I could think about was how much I wanted to take my food upstairs and eat in peace. Finally, I grabbed my oatmeal, told her nothing more, and went back upstairs. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't explosive. I just left because at that point, there was nothing else to say. She still hadn't told me what the social security card was for, beyond the bare minimum of paperwork. That's the part that gets me the most. If she had simply explained what kind of paperwork it was, we probably wouldn't even be having this issue. If it was something straightforward like health insurance, school records, or a job application, I would have understood. But asking me for such an important document without any explanation, that didn't sit right with me. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I have every right to protect myself. A social security card isn't just another piece of paper. It's tied to everything. My identity, my finances, my future. If someone misuses it, that's on me to clean up, not them. So, I don't think it's unreasonable to ask for clarity before handing it over, even to my own mom. Maybe to her, my refusal felt like mistrust. Maybe she thought I was being rebellious or ungrateful. But to me, it was just about boundaries. If you want access to something that important, you need to give me a good reason. Paperwork isn't good enough. And throwing in that strange comment about how she could have already used it for something bad, that didn't exactly boost my confidence. In the end, I didn't give it to her. I ate my oatmeal upstairs, thought about how bizarre the whole exchange had been, and decided that if she really needs it, she can try again, but this time with an actual explanation. That's where the story ends. This one really shows how simple communication could have solved everything. A quick explanation, and it wouldn't have turned into a standoff. It's also a good reminder of how protective you have to be with stuff like social security cards, even when family is involved. Honestly, I don't blame them for sticking to their guns here. This next story is about a woman who just got engaged, only for her sister to explode in anger because her fiancé has the exact same name as her husband. I'm 22, and just last week, my boyfriend, well, fiancé now, proposed to me. We've been together for 2 years, and even after just 6 months of dating, we knew it was right and moved in together. He planned the proposal at the same park where we had our very first date. It was simple, sweet, and so personal. I called my parents right after to tell them, and of course I called my older sister too. She's 25, and we've always been close. We grew up clinging to each other after our parents divorced. I was 5, she was 8. Over the years, we leaned on each other through every breakup, every stress, every big milestone. She was the person I trusted most, which is why I was confused when she didn't seem all that excited about my engagement. She didn't really react the way I thought she would, but I brushed it off in the moment. I figured maybe she was tired, or maybe she just didn't know what to say right then. Here's where the complication comes in. My fiancé's name is Casper. My sister's husband's name is Casper. Yes, it's the same name, just spelled differently. My brother-in-law Casper is 28, and I've always gotten along with him. I was even the maid of honor at their wedding, standing right next to them as they said their vows. And until now, the duplicate names were never an issue. We've always just referred to them as my Casper, or OP's Casper, or sometimes just Casper K. It wasn't a big deal, and my sister had always gone along with it, or so I thought. A few nights ago, we had our usual monthly dinner at my sister's place. It's been a tradition for a while now, something that's supposed to be fun and comforting. Everything started off normal, and my brother-in-law even asked about the proposal. He seemed genuinely curious and supportive, asking what our wedding plans might look like. My fiancé and I talked a little about the park proposal, about how we weren't rushing the wedding, but were starting to think about venues. But while we were chatting, my sister just sat there in silence. No smile, no questions, no congratulations. Then, out of nowhere, she got up and walked into the kitchen. I followed her, thinking maybe she was upset about something else. Maybe work stress, maybe something personal. When I asked what was wrong, she kept saying nothing. brushing me off. But eventually, she exploded. She looked me right in the eye and said I was a horrible person for wanting to marry someone with the same name as her husband. I was stunned. I didn't even know how to respond at first. She went on, saying it would be too confusing for the entire family, that there couldn't be two Caspers in the mix. I tried to stay calm and reminded her that we'd been making it work for 2 years already, using nicknames or clarifying with my Casper or your Casper. But she cut me off, yelling that she'd only gone along with that stupid idea because she assumed we'd break up after a year or two, like my past relationships. She said she never thought it would get serious. That one really hurt. I've had breakups before, sure, but who hasn't? To hear my sister admit she'd basically been waiting for my relationship to fail was like a punch to the gut. I couldn't believe she was serious. By then, both guys came into the kitchen, hearing the yelling. My fiancé stepped in between us, trying to calm things down, while my brother-in-law gently pulled my sister back into their bedroom. Before she left, she kept glaring at me like I'd ruined everything just by falling in love with someone who happened to share her husband's name. Afterward, my brother-in-law apologized for her behavior. He said she's been under a lot of stress at work lately, and didn't mean what she said, but the words are still ringing in my head. She called me selfish. She called me a bad sister, and all because of a name that, frankly, none of us chose in the first place. When we left, I said goodbye to my brother-in-law, but I couldn't bring myself to say anything to my sister. I was hurt, and I didn't trust myself not to snap back at her again. Now, I don't really know what to do. Cutting contact feels extreme, but part of me wonders if I need to take a step back from her. She doesn't seem to want to accept my fiancé, and that's not something I can just ignore. The hardest part is that we've always been so close. We were each other's support system for years. We got each other through our parents' divorce. She was there for me during the hardest breakups of my life, and I was there when she needed someone too. But right now, she feels more like an enemy than a sister. I also don't want to drag our parents into this. They've always had a tendency to take sides, and I know how it would go. One would side with her, the other with me, and it would just blow everything up into a bigger mess. I don't want to start a family feud over names, but at the same time, I can't pretend like what she said didn't hurt deeply. So here I am, stuck in this strange place where I'm excited about my engagement and my future with Casper, but at the same time, I'm mourning the relationship I thought I had with my sister, all because two people we love happen to share the same name. That story stops there. What stood out to me was how much history these two sisters share, and how fast it turned tense once marriage entered the picture. Honestly, the frustration here feels less about the name and more about deeper emotions spilling out. It's one of those family conflicts that looks small on the surface, but cuts way deeper underneath. This next story is about someone who was so frustrated with their friend's constant lateness that they told her the wrong time on purpose, but when she actually showed up early for once, it completely backfired. I've got this one friend who is just chronically late. I don't mean occasionally late, I mean nearly every single time we meet up, she's at least 15 minutes behind, sometimes even closer to 45. And it's not like she tells me well in advance. What usually happens is, right around the time she's supposed to arrive, I'll get a quick text saying something like, "Running late, be there soon." By that point, I'm already at the place or waiting at home, so it doesn't actually help me plan. It just leaves me stuck sitting around, frustrated. After months of this, I finally told her how I felt. I said, if I hadn't reminded you last time, or pushed back the time, I would have been on time and just sitting there waiting. That's annoying. I asked her if she could at least start texting me when she was leaving her house so I could try to time things better on my end. To her credit, she actually listened. She started texting me when she left, and that made it a little easier to manage. But it didn't solve the root problem. She was still late compared to the time we'd agreed on. So even though I knew when she was leaving, I still had to adjust my own schedule and sometimes push back other plans to make room for her lateness. It was better than nothing, but it wasn't really fixing things. Eventually, I decided to try out a strategy I've seen recommended over and over again. If someone's always late, just tell them an earlier time. That way, when they show up late, it's actually the right time. It seemed logical, and honestly, I was desperate to avoid another night of waiting around. So when I was hosting a small gathering at my place last week, I put the plan into action. I told her to come over at 7, but I told everyone else 8. My thinking was that she'd show up around 7:30 or 7:45, which would line up perfectly with everyone else arriving. But of course, the universe decided this would be the one and only time she'd show up early. At exactly 7 o'clock, she knocked on my door. For the first time ever, she was on time. Technically, even early, since the real start was later. She came in, looked around and asked, "Where is everyone?" That's when I admitted it. I told her, "Well, you usually come late to things, so I thought I'd tell you an earlier time to make sure you'd actually get here on time." She did not appreciate that honesty. She said she could have done other things with her time if she hadn't been told the wrong time. For the rest of the night, I could tell she was annoyed with me, even though she stayed. The vibe was a little awkward because she clearly felt like she'd been tricked. Later on, she texted me. She said she was really bothered by what I did. She called it passive-aggressive and childish, and said that if I had a problem with her punctuality, I should have just been direct instead of trying to manipulate her into showing up on time. Now I'm stuck wondering if I really was out of line. On one hand, it's incredibly frustrating to constantly deal with someone being late. I felt like I'd already tried addressing it directly by asking her to text me when she leaves, but that still didn't fix the bigger issue. On the other hand, I can admit that telling someone the wrong time might come across as sneaky, and the fact that she was early for once made it even worse. I honestly thought this was a clever way to handle it, but instead it blew up in my face. I wanted her to arrive at a normal time like everyone else, and instead she feels disrespected. That story ends there. This one really shows how even well-meaning tricks can backfire. The idea sounded logical, tell a late friend an earlier time so things balance out. But when she actually showed up early, it flipped into a whole different issue. What stood out to me most is how both sides felt justified. One tired of waiting, the other embarrassed at being manipulated. It's one of those situations where frustration boiled over into a strategy that just didn't land right. This next story is about a couple's playful moment turning unexpectedly painful when a silly back and forth ended with the boyfriend hurting himself and demanding an apology. Last night started out like any other quiet evening with my boyfriend. We were just hanging out together, watching TV, the kind of night that feels calm and comfortable. He had brought in some ice pops for us, and after we finished eating them, I got up to take the trash out. Nothing dramatic, just one of those small, ordinary moments. I stood in front of him and reached for the wrapper in his hand, since I was already holding mine and figured I'd throw both away. He pulled his hand back, like he wanted to take care of his own trash. It was lighthearted at first, almost like a little game. I leaned in again, reaching, and he pulled back again. It turned into this back and forth. Not serious at all, just playful silliness. At one point, I pointed my finger at him and jokingly said something along the lines of, "This is your last chance for me to take that trash." It was the kind of teasing I grew up with. My older brother and I used to do stuff like this all the time, where we'd tug over something or try to outstubborn each other until one of us finally gave up. But then my boyfriend grabbed my finger. Not in a mean way, more like he was pulling it toward his mouth, pretending he was going to bite it. I didn't actually think he would bite me, but I didn't want my finger anywhere near his teeth, so I resisted. I pulled back while he kept tugging, and then suddenly, my finger slipped out of his grip. The next second, his own hand shot forward and smacked him right in the mouth. The sound of it, the sheer absurdity of the moment, I burst out laughing. I laughed harder than I had all day, to the point of tears. It was one of those moments where I couldn't stop myself, no matter how much I tried. But while I was doubled over in laughter, he was not amused. He looked at me, furious, and told me I'd basically hit him with his own fist. He started saying his tooth felt out of place, that a nerve was exposed, and that somehow the roof of his mouth was injured too. He insisted this was all my fault, that I had caused it, and that I needed to apologize. We ended up arguing for 20 minutes straight. He was angry, telling me I should say sorry for hitting him. I told him that I hadn't hit him. His own fist had hit his face when my finger slipped free. I couldn't wrap my head around apologizing for something I didn't physically do. It reminded me so much of when I was younger, when my brother and I would both be pulling on an object, and one of us would suddenly let go. The other would go flying backward or forward, and maybe land on the floor. Whoever let go didn't push the other. It was just the natural result of both people tugging in opposite directions. That's how this felt. My boyfriend didn't see it that way. To him, the outcome was all that mattered. He got hurt, so I was to blame. He even started bringing up all the nice things he's done for me recently, like buying me a Nintendo Switch completely out of nowhere a couple of the weeks ago. Instead of feeling appreciated, I felt manipulated, like he was stacking his good deeds against me in order to guilt me into apologizing. For context, I do live with ASD, and one part of that is very literal thinking. To me, I couldn't reconcile saying I hit you when I clearly didn't. It wasn't my hand, it wasn't intentional, and I wasn't going to apologize for something that didn't happen. I did, however, apologize for laughing so hard in the moment. I knew it hurt him to see me find humor in his pain, and that wasn't fair. I also apologized for not taking his injury as seriously as I should have at first, but beyond that, I held my ground. The thing is, our relationship isn't exactly smooth sailing, even outside of this. We're both in therapy, separately, because we each carry trauma. He struggles with rage issues, and I've dealt with trauma of my own. On top of that, we've both been emotionally and verbally abusive toward each other at times. It's something we're both painfully aware of, and we've acknowledged that we have a lot of work to do, both as individuals and as a couple. So what started out as a silly tug of war over trash spiraled into a bigger argument about accountability, trust, and even manipulation. And here I am, wondering why a harmless, playful moment ended in shouting, guilt trips, and me questioning whether I was wrong for not saying sorry in the way he wanted me to. That's the end of this story. This one really shows how something tiny can turn into something much bigger when there's already tension in a relationship. It's hard not to laugh at the slapstick side of it, but at the same time, the reaction afterwards says a lot about what's really going on between them. It feels less about the accident itself and more about deeper frustrations boiling up. This next story is about a young woman who's been left as the primary caregiver for her terminally ill mother-in-law, only to be disrespected by her in-laws and treated poorly despite all the sacrifices she's made. I'm 23 years old, and for the last year and a half, I've been the main caregiver for my mother-in-law. She's 64 and currently on home hospice. She's been living in my house for the past 5 months, but I was already caring for her for almost a full year before her terminal diagnosis. And despite the fact that she has 10 children, it somehow ended up falling on me and my husband to care for her. And if I'm being honest, it's mostly me. I never signed up to be a nurse. I never asked for this role. But when nobody else stepped up, I took it on. My days are consumed with tasks that are far beyond normal family duties. I help her bathe, I cook and clean, I measure and administer her medications, and I even handle medical procedures at home that I was never trained for but learned out of necessity. On top of all that, I still work a job, I have a husband, and I have a child to raise. It's a lot for anyone, and the truth is, it's been taking a toll on me and on my marriage. What makes it worse is that her 9 other children, my husband's siblings, do absolutely nothing to help. They don't contribute financially, they don't provide emotional support, they don't even offer to take shifts so I can breathe for a moment. Instead, they criticize me. They've told me outright that I should quit my job so I can be available 24/7, as though my only purpose should be to serve their mother, while they carry on with their own lives. One of the most recent fights started when they wanted to take her on a trip. Her body is extremely weak, and as her caregiver, I spoke with the nurse about whether it would be safe. Together, we agreed it would put her health at serious risk. So I told the siblings plainly, this wasn't something she could withstand. I wasn't trying to be controlling. I was just being honest, based on the reality of her condition. Instead of hearing me out, they attacked me. They yelled, saying I had no say because I wasn't her child. They told me to mind my business, to stay out of it, even though I'm the one who's been caring for her every single day. The hypocrisy burned. They act like my involvement doesn't matter, yet I'm the one cleaning her, feeding her, sitting with her through the hard moments they don't even show up for. My husband, thankfully, defended me. He told them outright that I had no obligation to take this on, but that I did anyway, because no one else would. He reminded them that I've been her main caretaker for more than a year while they've been absent. But instead of reflecting on that, they went to my mother-in-law and twisted the story. They told her I was trying to keep her away from them, that I was disrespecting the family. Since then, it's been 3 weeks of misery. My mother-in-law, who I've been sacrificing so much for, has been treating me horribly. Every day it feels like I'm being punished, talked down to, or ignored. And at some point, I broke. I told my husband I couldn't do it anymore. My mental health was unraveling, and the resentment was building in ways I couldn't push down anymore. He understood. He even told me that his mom was in the wrong, and that I didn't deserve the treatment I was getting. But of course now, the siblings are calling me an asshole. They've started saying I'm abandoning her, that I'm selfish, that I'm the problem in all of this. And yet, not one of them is stepping up to fill the gap. They want the care done, but they don't want to lift a finger to do it themselves. I don't feel like the villain here. I gave 1.5 years of my life, my time, my energy, my sanity, to caring for someone who isn't even my blood relative. I showed up when no one else did. I put in the effort they weren't willing to. But I'm not a machine. I can't be endlessly poured out while being disrespected and devalued. So, when I said I was done, it wasn't out of cruelty. It was out of survival. If I keep carrying the weight alone, it's gonna break me. And I know deep down that I'm not the one failing here. The failure belongs to the 9 other children who left everything on my shoulders and then had the audacity to insult me when I finally said I couldn't do it anymore. That story ends there. This one's tough because you can feel just how drained she is. Caregiving is already exhausting, but doing it alone while being criticized makes it unbearable. What stood out most to me was the hypocrisy. 9 siblings on the sidelines, pointing fingers, while she's the one holding everything together. It really shows how unfair family dynamics can get when responsibility isn't shared. This next story is about an uncle who took in his teenage niece after she cruelly lashed out at her stepmother, and now faces conflict with his brother over whether she should still be allowed to have a normal teenage life. Back in June, my niece Abby came to live with me and my partner. She's 15, and after a lot of family drama, I became her legal guardian. Her dad, my brother, is still in her life, but the day-to-day responsibility is on me now. To give a little context, Abby's mom passed away when she was 9 years old. That left a big hole in her life. When my brother remarried a couple years later, Abby was 11, and it was obvious she wasn't happy about the remarriage. Everyone could see it. She never warmed up to her stepmother. Most of the time, she ignored her. Sometimes when her stepmom tried to parent her, there would be arguments or sharp outbursts. The real breaking point came earlier this year. In May, my brother threw a birthday dinner for his wife. It was a family party, and everyone was expected to participate. Abby was told she needed to write a card for her stepmother and give it to her along with the gift my brother had bought on her behalf. Abby did write something, but instead of a card full of polite words, she used it as a chance to unload everything she felt. I can't quote it word for word, but the gist was brutal. Abby told her stepmother straight up that she hated her, that she never wanted her to marry her dad, and that she'd never be as good as her mom. She called her ugly and compared her unfavorably to her late mother, even saying that her mom was prettier, a better cook, and more loved by everyone. She said 1 million women like her stepmom could never add up to half of her mom. She didn't stop there. Abby said she was glad her dad and stepmom couldn't have kids, and she hoped that her stepmom would never get pregnant successfully. She made fun of her clothes and her taste in decorating the house. She called her an outsider. She reminded her that Abby's mom was the love of her dad's life, not her, and she repeated several times that she would never love her, never accept her, and that she'd be thrilled if they got divorced. It was an absolute tirade, right in front of everyone. People tried to stop her, but Abby insisted she was going to finish since she was being forced to give her stepmother something. The card turned into a speech that cut deep. My brother was devastated. He tried to discipline Abby afterward. He told her to apologize. He put her on a waiting list for therapy. He even got her therapy books, hoping that something in there would spark some self-reflection or regret. He punished her. He talked with her. But a month later, nothing had changed. Abby didn't apologize. She didn't back down. She didn't seem sorry at all. At that point, my brother decided it wasn't working. He said Abby being in the same home as his wife was too toxic after what she had said, and he asked if someone else in the family could take her in. That's when my partner and I stepped up. We offered, but we said if it was going to be more than a week or two, guardianship needed to be transferred to us. And that's what happened. Abby moved in with us, and I became her guardian. Since then, Abby has started therapy. She's still firm in her feelings. She hasn't apologized. She hasn't expressed regret. She doesn't want to see her stepmother, and she's actually said she's happy not to live with her anymore. She does still see her dad. usually once or twice a week. The issue now is that my brother is upset with me. He's been grumbling that Abby's not being punished enough under my care. He sees her spending time with her friends, going to the movies, and doing the normal things a 15-year-old likes to do. And he's angry. He told me that until she apologizes, she should be fully grounded. No fun, no social life, nothing. He said because she got her way by not living with her stepmother anymore, she doesn't deserve to also have a normal life on top of that. I told him I disagreed. I said when Abby came to live with me, the only conditions he mentioned were therapy, and she is doing that. I reminded him that her therapist specifically said grounding her endlessly wouldn't magically produce the apology or remorse he wants. He didn't like that. He said Abby doesn't deserve to have fun, and that I should agree with him. But here's where I stand. I don't think punishing Abby into the ground will fix anything. She's grieving, angry, and resentful. Therapy is the right path. Taking away her ability to hang out with friends or enjoy life won't make her suddenly love her stepmother. All it will do is make her more bitter. And honestly, she's already in a better place mentally since moving in with us. She has stability, she's starting to process things with a professional, and she's not at war in her own home anymore. My brother, though, sees it differently. He thinks I'm letting her off the hook. He thinks she's getting away with cruelty scot-free. And now I'm left wondering if I'm wrong for letting Abby live her life like a normal teenager while she works through this in therapy, or if my brother is the one being too extreme. That's where this story ends. This one is heavy. On one side, the dad wants strict punishment, but on the other, the uncle is focusing on therapy and stability. Honestly, it makes sense that grounding forever wouldn't solve the root problem. It's interesting how different people in the same family can see discipline so differently, especially when grief and resentment are a part of the mix. This next story is about a graphic designer whose boss demanded ads be finished 3 months early, so the team followed the rule to the letter, drowning him in notifications until he gave up control. I've been a senior graphic designer at my company for 5 years, and the best way to describe those years is this. Imagine sprinting on a treadmill while someone else keeps quietly turning up the speed. When I started, the marketing team was tiny but stable. Just a marketing manager, a marketing executive, and me. They handle calendars, media buys, and meetings. I handled the creative. Over time, both of them left, and every stray responsibility slid onto my desk like another stack of proofs. What used to feel focused started to feel like trying to juggle while riding a bike. The backbone of my days is a massive advertising schedule that lives inside our project management system. Every deliverable, print placements, digital banners, e-blast tied to ad buys gets a ticket. Tickets get checklists. Checklists get attachments. The tool logs every comment and every view with a timestamp, like a little black box for marketing decisions. Our VP of Sales and Marketing, who's been with the company for more than 3 decades, designed the approval process long before I arrived. His version of quality control is a formal gauntlet. I tag the product manager, then the proofreader, then any stakeholder who might care. They weigh in. I revise. The task advances 1 square at a time. At the very end, the ad lands in the VP's queue for a final sign-off. He also insists on being copied on every notification along the way. Sometimes the path is smooth. A product manager hits approve, the proofreader catches a stray hyphen, I tidy one caption, and we ship. But more often, I watch the timestamps like a weather radar. Viewed, 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 then nothing. The ad sits at that last checkpoint waiting, while a deadline creeps closer on the calendar. When the VP finally opens it, hours or days later, he rejects the piece with comments that could have been made back at draft 1. Swap the headline order. Make the callout blue, not teal. Let's try a left-aligned layout. Because he waits until the end, all the earlier approvals get blown up, and I'm rebuilding a house I already finished. After a while, I started pointing it out. The tool shows when a proof is uploaded and when it's viewed. If he knows he prefers blue to teal, he could tell us when the first proof posts instead of rejecting the final. His answer, delivered very calmly in one of our one-on-ones, was, then have it done 3 months in advance. He also added that each insertion should look distinct, even if it was the same campaign running in 5 magazines. New layouts, fresh photo crops, renewed headline polish, no repeats. Meanwhile, the budget for help was always not there right now. I kept swimming, but The pace was ridiculous. 4 years of that ground me down. I'm good at details, but when you're moving that fast alone, the dumbest mistakes creep in. I missed a tiny trademark symbol. I misread a crop note and trimmed a product image a hair too tight. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to make me dread the moment his cursor appeared in the comment stream. I wasn't failing. I was overextended. At my biannual review, HR sat in. I brought printouts of our ad calendar and a quick audit of how many unique placements we were shipping each month. I explained how the bottleneck at the very end created false urgency. I said plainly that the 3 months ahead goal was impossible as a team of one, especially with the no repeat rule. The VP looked at me and asked with total sincerity, "Is it typical for companies to have more than one graphic designer?" I thought he was being dry. He wasn't. I laid out the workload again, and to my surprise, he finally said, "Okay, hire one." It felt like someone cracked open a window in a stuffy room. Our new hire started in January. On day 2, while I was showing him our font library, asset naming, and how to keep proofs tidy inside the project tool, he passed along a comment the VP had made to him in the hallway. "I never imagined we'd need 2 designers. You guys should have no problem being 3 months ahead on ads now." It landed like a dare. For years, I'd asked for better process. Instead, he'd given me a metric. Fine. I decided to hit the metric so directly, it would make a sound. I split the work. The new designer handled first passes and recurring placements. I handled concepts, headlines, and final polish. We built real templates for publications that valued consistency and modular systems for the ones that demanded novelty. We documented specs, dimensions, live area, bleed, color profiles, and stuck them to every ticket so the technical pieces were automatic. Then we lived inside the project system like it was our studio. Every step generated a visible breadcrumb. Every breadcrumb generated a notification. The VP had insisted on visibility into every stage, so he got visibility into every stage. Where tasks stalled at his desk, we added polite automation. If he didn't approve within 4 business hours, the system sent a reminder. If it sat 8 hours, another ping. The next day, it nudged him every hour until he clicked one of 2 buttons, approve or request changes. We weren't snarky about it. The messages were friendly and concise. At the end of each week, we emailed a status report with thumbnails of every ad in flight, a note on what had shipped, and a banner right at the top that read, "Working toward 3 months ahead of deadlines." We kept the tone upbeat. We also kept the pressure steady. The machine worked. With 2 people building at once, pieces moved in batches instead of drips. And because our soon-to-be marketing manager reviewed early, we fixed subjective tweaks before they became end-of-line rejections. By March, we were 6 weeks ahead. By April, we were flirting with 2 full months. In May, we crossed the line and started living at the magic number. I won't lie, a tiny part of me enjoyed seeing the notification counter pile up on the VP's board. He wanted visibility. He got it. Right before my next review, everything shifted. The VP opened the meeting with an announcement I did not expect. Our marketing assistant would be promoted to marketing manager. From that day forward, he said, the marketing manager would own the advertising schedule and be the final point person for approvals. Then, almost as an aside, he asked that all non-essential notifications be removed from his inbox because he didn't have the bandwidth anymore. Translation, the person who had insisted on seeing every proof no longer wanted to see any proofs. The difference was immediate. Our new marketing manager reads proofs the day they arrive. He'll flag a line that feels soft, or a photo that looks muddy, and then follow it up with, "Use your judgment." We still finish far ahead of schedule, but it feels athletic instead of frantic. In the spring, we hired a junior designer. A few months later, a coordinator joined to wrangle assets and copy deadlines. Suddenly, the department felt like a team again, rather than a single overloaded desk with a stack of sticky notes. A couple weeks after the promotion, my now manager tried to loop the VP in on next year's ad roadmap out of courtesy. He came back to my desk grinning. He waved me off. He said, "Told me, I don't need to see it. Handle it." The same person who once micromanaged kerning now wanted nothing to do with line breaks. I don't think he's a villain. I think he got used to guarding the gate and forgot to check whether the fence still needed guarding. When the gate started ringing his phone every hour, he realized there were better places to stand. Looking back, I'm less triumphant than relieved. The process didn't improve because someone gave a stirring speech. It improved because we matched a demand with relentless transparency until the demand changed shape. 2 designers instead of 1. A manager who reviews early instead of late. A system that pings when it helps instead of when it hinders. We hit the exact target our VP set, not with heroics, but with enough hands and a steady cadence. And when the flood of updates finally persuaded him to step aside, the team did what good teams do. We filled the space and kept moving. That story ends there. Some bosses don't change until the system nudges them harder than people can. It's kind of satisfying when following the rulebook exposes how broken the rulebook is. What I like most is how the momentum stayed after he stepped back. That's the sweet spot. Less drama, more work getting done. This next story is about a kid who accidentally ratted out his own mom at Greek customs, turning a harmless bag of olives into a full-on smuggling investigation. This goes back to when I was 9 years old, but it's one of those childhood memories that sticks forever. At the time, my mom had taken me on a Mediterranean cruise. It was this exciting trip with different stops in different countries, and one of the stops was Greece, so we could visit some of our extended family. When we got there, my great-aunt gifted us a small bag of her homemade olives. Nothing fancy, nothing illegal in my child's mind, just a simple bag of olives in brine. To me, they felt about as harmless as a snack you'd throw in your backpack. The thing is, customs rules can be tricky. I was too young to understand that bringing food across borders was often restricted. To me, it was just a family gift. I didn't know there was a difference between candy, chips, or a bag of olives soaked in salty water. When you're a cruise passenger, customs always felt more relaxed to me. You don't have giant luggage rolling through like at an airport. You're usually just carrying day trip items, maybe a bag or 2, and then you're on your way. I had gone through with my mom before, and it had never been an issue. She was always confident and breezy about it. So there we were, walking up to the customs officer. He asked us the standard question, anything to declare? Plants, animals, food, local products? My mom smiled, casual as ever, and said, nope, that should have been the end of it. But 9-year-old me, autistic and completely incapable of lying or keeping quiet, decided to chime in at full volume. I blurted out, but Mom, what about the olives? I can still remember the way the air shifted in that instant. 1 second, we were just another harmless mother and child pair walking through. The next, the customs officer perked up like a hawk, spotting prey. Suddenly, we weren't harmless tourists anymore. We were suspicious. Potential smugglers. The officer motioned us aside. Bags had to be opened. Questions started coming. My mom was flustered, scrambling to explain it away as a simple misunderstanding. She tried to play it off like she had forgotten about them, like it was no big deal. But of course, I didn't stop there, because 9-year-old me wasn't done yet. In an attempt to be extra helpful, I loudly added, we also have fruit sticks. Now, to me, fruit sticks meant candy. They were little chewy snacks, basically sugar dressed up with fruit flavoring. But the way I said it, in the middle of a tense customs inspection, made it sound like we were also hiding illicit produce. You could practically see the officer's ears twitch. My mom had to quickly dig through the bag and fish out the package to prove it was just candy. Once she showed them, the officers started to relax. In fact, their stern expressions softened into something closer to amusement. They realized I was just a blunt little kid trying to be honest. I even remember offering to eat the olives on the spot so we wouldn't get in trouble. That made them laugh. Here was this kid trying to solve the crime by scarfing down the evidence. For a brief moment, the whole scene went from tense to funny. Eventually, they waved us through. No fines, no confiscations that I can recall. Just some raised eyebrows, some laughter, and my mom's exasperated sighs. But to 9-year-old me, it felt like forever. I thought we were in serious danger. To this day, my mom still teases me about it. Whenever someone talks about travel or customs, she'll bring up how I'm the world's worst partner in crime. If she had ever tried to smuggle something serious, I would have ratted her out before we even got to the officer. Looking back now, I can laugh at it. But in that moment, it was the perfect storm of childhood innocence, my inability to let a lie slide, and the dramatic seriousness of a customs officer who suddenly thought we might be carrying contraband olives. That story wraps up here. I love how this one shows the honesty of kids at the worst possible moment. It's funny how a simple bag of olives turned into a full inspection just because a 9-year-old couldn't keep quiet. and the image of offering to eat the evidence might be my favorite part. This next story is about a bride who refused to allow her sister-in-law's service dog at her wedding because her maid of honor has severe dog allergies, and now the family is accusing her of being ableist. My fiancé and I are getting married in 5 months. Invitations have gone out, and most of the planning is well underway. But now there's a major conflict we didn't anticipate, and it revolves around my sister-in-law and her service dog. Here's the background. My sister-in-law, my fiancé's brother's wife, has a medical service dog because she had brain cancer about 5 years ago. As a result, she suffers from seizures several times a week. They usually come on with a brief dizzy spell, and then she goes unconscious for a few minutes. Her dog, a Labrador, is trained to sense the seizures a minute or two before they happen. He alerts her, giving her time to sit or lie down in a safe place and warn people around her. It's a genuine medical necessity, and the dog is an absolute angel. The problem isn't the dog, it's her. I'll be honest, I don't really like my sister-in-law. She's not easy to get along with. She makes comments that are flat out wrong about my fiancés and my professional fields. We work in medicine and environmental biology, and when we politely correct her, she yells at us. Still, we've always kept things civil for the sake of family harmony, mostly because my fiancé's brother adores her. On the other side of the equation is my own sister, who happens to be my maid of honor and truly my favorite person in the world. My sister has severe allergies to dogs. If she's in the same room as a dog, her eyes get bloodshot and swollen, she sneezes uncontrollably, and she has asthma flare-ups. Antihistamines do nothing for her. They just don't work. If she spends 5 straight hours in a closed room with a dog, she will inevitably have a dangerous asthma attack. My fiancé and I want my sister to feel comfortable, healthy, and safe at our wedding. Selfishly, I also want her to look and feel good in the pictures, not red-eyed and miserable. At the same time, we don't want to jeopardize my sister-in-law's safety. We came up with what felt like a reasonable compromise. Her husband would stay glued to her side the entire night, or she could bring an additional guest whose only role was to be her support person in case of a seizure. That way she would still have someone to help her if her condition flared up, but my sister wouldn't end up wheezing and swollen all night. Unfortunately, the venue adds to the issue. It's a small room, only 50 people, with no outdoor option since we're having a winter wedding. There's no possible way to keep my sister and the service dog separated. Our plan was to sit down with her and explain all this in person, but she canceled our lunch at the last minute. Since the invitations had to go out, we sent her a long message instead, carefully explaining the situation, the constraints, and our proposed solution. We thought that might even be better, since it gave her time to process without being put on the spot. The reaction was nothing like what we hoped. She called me immediately, screaming. She said I was ableist, cruel, and selfish for suggesting she attend without her medical support animal. She accused me of setting her up to collapse at the wedding and maybe get a concussion. My brother-in-law simply said, "What she says goes," without weighing in himself. Then my mother-in-law jumped in. She's furious and now says she won't attend the wedding if her daughter-in-law can't bring the dog. Now I feel completely stuck. I'll admit I'm biased. I love my sister dearly, and I know what it's like to live with allergies myself, since I have severe food allergies. To me, allergies are a serious health risk that need to be accommodated, especially at a wedding. But I also understand that to my sister-in-law, her dog is a literal lifeline. What I don't know is whether prioritizing my maid of honor's health over my sister-in-law's service dog makes me selfish or makes me practical. My fiancé and I don't want anyone in danger on our wedding day. Not my sister, not my sister-in-law. But it feels like no matter what we choose, someone is going to accuse us of being unfair. That's where this story ends. This one's tough because it's 2 real medical needs colliding head-on. On one side, the sister-in-law depends on her dog for safety. On the other, the maid of honor has severe, uncontrollable allergies. There isn't a solution that fixes everything, and the small venue just makes it worse. What stood out most is how quickly the family dynamic turned hostile, when really it's just a no-win situation. This next story is about a guy who secretly hid his girlfriend's contact lenses because he was worried about her eye health, and now he's wondering if he'd be the jerk if he did it again. I'm 24, and I live with my girlfriend Lena, who's 23. Right now she's working on her master's degree, which means her schedule is packed every single day. Most mornings she's out the door by 8 for class, and she's usually on campus until early afternoon. Then later, in the evenings, she's back at our place working online. Between coursework, teaching responsibilities, and her evening job hours, she's busy almost nonstop. Since I work from home full-time, I get a front row seat to her daily routine. And over time, one thing has become really obvious to me. Her eyes are constantly suffering. Every day, she leaves for class wearing her contact lenses. By the time she comes home, her eyes are red, watery, and irritated. You can actually see the difference. She'll blink a lot, rub at them, and complain that they feel itchy or dry. Once she takes the lenses out and puts on her glasses, her eyes start to calm down. Within an hour, the redness fades. She'll look more comfortable, she'll stop squinting, and she'll actually relax a little. But then, almost every evening, she has a video call for work. And the moment that camera turns on, she pulls her glasses off because she doesn't like how she looks in them. She's self-conscious, and she insists she doesn't want her coworkers or classmates seeing her with glasses on. So instead of wearing them, she just sits there without any correction at all. That lasts for maybe 30 minutes before the headaches hit. By the end of those calls, she's rubbing her temples and sometimes even lying down with the lights off because the migraines are so bad. It's gotten to the point where I'm genuinely worried she's hurting herself. She wakes up most mornings with watery eyes thanks to allergies. So her eyes are already stressed before she even puts the contacts in. Add in a full day of wearing them, plus taking them out for hours on end when she should really be using her glasses, and it feels like she's just running herself into the ground. I've tried talking to her about it. I tell her all the time that she looks gorgeous in her glasses. Honestly, she does. I've never once looked at her and thought she was less attractive with them on. To me, she's the prettiest person in the world, but she doesn't believe me. She thinks glasses make her look awkward or nerdy, and she doesn't want to feel less than in front of other people. She does have prescription eye drops, and they work really well when she uses them, but she hates the weird aftertaste they leave in her throat, so she avoids them unless I basically have to push her into it. I'll literally remind her several times, and then finally she'll roll her eyes at me, put them in, and admit after a few minutes that her eyes feel better. It's frustrating because she knows they help, but she resists until she's desperate. The thing is, I don't think she realizes how bad this could get. She acts like itchy eyes are just normal, but I'm terrified she's going to end up with a scratched cornea or some kind of infection, and I can't stand watching her hurt herself when I know there's an easy fix sitting right there on her nightstand. Last Friday was a good example of how all this plays out. She came home from class and didn't have any evening calls scheduled, so her eyes had a chance to settle down. They were still a little itchy, but definitely better than usual. That night, we had dinner plans with some friends. While she was rushing to get ready, I noticed her rubbing at her eyelids because they were irritated from the eyeliner she'd just put on. I knew what was coming. The second she put her contacts in, the irritation was going to get worse. So, without really thinking it through, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I grabbed her contact case and tucked it away where she wouldn't find it. When she went to put them in and couldn't find them, she sighed, grabbed her glasses instead, and we left. She didn't actually wear the glasses much while we were out, just enough to read the menu, but at least she didn't have the lenses irritating her eyes all night, and the difference was noticeable. She wasn't squinting, she wasn't blinking constantly. Her eyes looked so much calmer, and by the time we got home, she didn't have a headache for once. I know it was sneaky. It wasn't fair of me to hide her things without telling her, but in my head, it was for her own good. I felt like I had to step in because she wasn't protecting herself. And honestly, it worked. Now I'm stuck wondering if that makes me a jerk. Would I be the bad guy if I did it again? Not all the time, but just once in a while. When her eyes are already in bad shape, I'm not trying to control her. I'm not trying to boss her around. I just want her to be okay. I love her, and it kills me to watch her put herself in pain when there's such an easy solution right in front of her. But I also know that hiding someone's stuff, even with good intentions, crosses a line. It's not just about health, it's about trust. If she caught me doing it again, she might see it as me treating her like a child who can't make her own decisions. And I don't want her to feel like I don't respect her choices. I feel like I'm caught in the middle. On one hand, I want to respect her autonomy and let her make her own decisions about her body. On the other hand, I feel like sitting back and doing nothing means watching her hurt herself every day. It's hard to balance caring for someone with respecting their independence, especially when they won't take their own health seriously. So that's where I'm at. I don't want to be sneaky, but I also don't want to watch her go blind in her 20s because she refuses to wear glasses. And I honestly don't know which option makes me the bigger jerk, hiding her contacts or letting her keep hurting herself. That's where this story finishes. This one really shows how tough it can be when you love someone but can't control their choices. The intention is good, but the method crosses into sketchy territory. What stands out is how much care and worry is behind the actions, but also how easy it is for that to slip into something that feels controlling. This is one of those situations where love and frustration are completely tangled together. This next story is about a woman who compared her sister's elopement to her other sister's religious wedding, and now her dad is furious because he thinks she was being disrespectful. I'm 27 and I have two sisters, Anna and Claire. Both of them are married now, but the way their weddings unfolded couldn't have been more different, and it's led to some really tense family conversations. Claire, the younger of the two, eloped a few months ago with her wife. It was a very small, simple event. In fact, I was the only member of our family who was there, and technically the only one invited. Even her in-laws weren't formally invited. They ended up flying out on their own just to be there, because they really wanted to support her. My side of the family didn't go, but not because of bitterness or anything. People had genuine reasons. Some couldn't get off work, others didn't have the money to travel, and a few just had too many obligations at home. Claire wasn't upset about it. She didn't expect anyone to show up anyway. She kept the whole thing small and low pressure for a reason. Anna's wedding, a few years earlier, was the opposite. She had a big traditional religious ceremony. But there was a catch. Only active members of that religion were allowed to attend. Both Claire and I had left the religion by then, which meant neither of us could be part of it. It hurt. I remember really wanting to be there, sitting in the audience, sharing that day with her, but because of the rules, we were excluded. Anna did have an option. Within her faith, it's common for couples to hold a public ceremony first, where everyone is welcome, and then go on to have the religious ceremony afterward. She could have chosen to do both, which would have allowed Claire and me to attend at least part of her wedding, but she didn't. She went solely with the religious ceremony. I'll be honest, it stung. I felt excluded from one of the most important milestones in her life. Still, I never held it against her. It was her wedding, her faith, and her choice. I respected that, even though it hurt. Fast forward to Claire's elopement. She had originally considered a more traditional wedding, but one of the reasons she backed away from it was because of drama with our dad. When she was planning the bigger event, she had asked her sisters, me and Anna, to walk her down the aisle. Our dad didn't take that well. He was angry, bitter, and openly complained about being left out of that symbolic role. That argument spiraled into a lot of tension, and in the end, it pushed Claire toward keeping things smaller and simpler. An elopement, with very few people there, meant less drama, less stress, and less chance for hurt feelings to blow up into something bigger. Here's where the issue really kicked in. After the elopement, my dad started ranting. He was furious, convinced Claire had chosen to elope as a personal slight against him. He acted like she deliberately tried to hurt him or embarrass him, when in reality, she was just trying to keep her wedding stress-free. Listening to him, it was like he couldn't see past his own disappointment. I tried to step in. I told him that to me, Claire's elopement felt similar to Anna's religious wedding. Not in motivation. I wasn't saying Claire and Anna made the same choices for the same reasons, but in terms of experience, the end result was the same. Family members couldn't be part of the actual ceremony. In Anna's case, Claire and I were excluded because of religious rules. In Claire's case, nearly everyone was excluded because she kept it small and simple. Either way, people who loved them were left out of that central moment. I even explained that I knew how painful that could be, because I'd felt it myself. I had wanted to attend Anna's wedding so badly, but I couldn't, and it hurt. That didn't mean I blamed her or thought she was wrong. I just meant that from the perspective of those left out, both weddings ended up feeling similar. My dad blew up at me. He said it wasn't the same at all. In his mind, Anna's wedding was sacred, holy, and untouchable, while Claire's elopement was selfish and inconsiderate. He couldn't or wouldn't see the comparison I was making. To me, though, the parallel is undeniable. In both situations, people were left on the outside for reasons they couldn't control. It didn't matter if it was religion or a choice to keep things small. The result was the same. People who loved the bride felt excluded. I wasn't trying to insult Anna's faith or diminish Claire's elopement. I was trying to show that both choices had real emotional consequences for their family. My dad refused to hear it. He sees Claire's choices through the lens of resentment. He still hasn't let go of the fact that she once asked her sisters to walk her down the aisle instead of him. He views her wedding decisions as a rejection of him personally, while Anna's choices get excused as religious devotion. From where I stand, that's a double standard. Claire and Anna both had the right to shape their weddings however they wanted. And yes, both decisions left people out. But in my mind, that's part of adulthood. You make choices that sometimes hurt or disappoint others, but they're still your choices. So now, I'm left wondering if I crossed a line by saying out loud what I saw as a fair comparison. I wasn't trying to hurt my dad. I wasn't attacking Anna's faith. I wasn't even trying to defend Claire in some big, dramatic way. I just wanted him to see that from the outside. Both weddings resulted in people being excluded, and it's unfair to treat one as sacred and the other as selfish. That's where this story ends. This one really shows how family bias can cloud judgment. The dad excuses one daughter because her wedding lines up with his beliefs, but condemns the other because it doesn't. What stands out is how calmly the narrator tried to point out the double standard, only to get shut down. It's one of those situations where you can see both weddings for what they were, personal choices, but the family politics make it way more complicated. This next story is about a homeowner who moved into a new build, started using a nearby council reserve with their kids, and then told the new neighbors that they wouldn't get the same exclusive perks the old neighbors had enjoyed. A few years ago, my wife and I bought a block of land that was part of a small development. A big acreage had been divided into about 30 quarter-acre lots, and slowly, houses were built up all around. We were one of the last families to actually move in. By the time we finished construction and settled into our new place, most of the neighborhood was already established, with only a couple of homes still being built behind us. Our house sits on the corner of what used to be part of that old acreage. Right next to us is a council-owned strip of land, a half-acre road reserve that was meant to become a street but never did. On the other side of that reserve is a house number 38, one of the older properties. To give you a visual, imagine our house is number 40, then there's the half-acre reserve, then house number 38. Now this reserve is technically council property. It's not privately owned, and because it was designated as a possible road site, no one can make a claim to it through adverse possession. In our state, it's nearly impossible to claim council-owned land anyway. You'd have to use and maintain it exclusively for over 30 years, and even then, the fact that it's earmarked as a road would overrule a claim. But somewhere along the line, maybe 2 or 3 owners back, someone at number 38 decided to treat the reserve like it was theirs. They put up a fence across the front of it and essentially absorbed the half-acre into their backyard. Council knew about it, but because they weren't using the reserve, they didn't bother enforcing anything. So for years, whoever lived at 38 acted like they owned the land, even though they didn't. When my wife and I first moved in, the family at 38 had chickens, ducks, and dogs penned up right at the front section of the reserve. I didn't think much of it. Honestly, I wasn't about to walk over and tell someone who had clearly already established use of the land that I was going to take it over. But when that family moved out recently, I saw it as a reset. After they left, I pulled down an old section of farm fencing that was actually on my side of the property line. Once that was out of the way, I started letting my kids run around in the reserve. It's a great space for them. Big, open grass, a tree with an old tire swing, plenty of room to play. They loved it. Then the new owners of 38 moved in. Almost immediately, there was tension. The wife stormed across the reserve one afternoon, yelling at me to get out of their property. I calmly explained that it wasn't theirs. It belonged to the council, but she didn't want to hear it. She assumed, I guess, that by buying house number 38, she was also buying exclusive access to that half-acre. She later apologized for screaming, but it was clear she still believed they had some kind of claim to the land. From my perspective, that's just not how it works. Yes, previous owners fenced it off. Yes, they treated it like an extension of their backyard. But just because someone got away with it in the past doesn't mean it automatically carries over to the next owner. Council never transferred the land, it's still public reserve, and the family who thought they had it before is gone. As soon as they left, it was fair game. I told the new neighbors that. I made it clear that I'm not trying to exclude them from the reserve. They're welcome to use it just like I am. But I'm not going to sit back and let them assume it's theirs alone. My kids are going to play there, and we're going to enjoy the space. I also don't even plan on using all of it, just the section alongside my property. There's still a good 2/3 of the reserve stretching behind us that I don't care about. The neighbors were incredulous. They even asked why I waited until the old family moved out to start using it. To me, the answer was obvious. I wasn't going to walk into a situation where someone had already claimed space for their animals and pick a fight over it. But once they were gone, it was open for use again. Legally, neither of us has more right than the other, but morally I feel like I've got the stronger case. We've actually owned our lot longer. We moved in before these new people did, and we were using the reserve before they even got the keys. If anything, they should be adjusting to the reality that it's not theirs, instead of acting like I'm intruding. To make it clear, I don't want to fence it off completely. Unlike some of the houses behind us that already put up colorbond fences along their boundary with the reserve, I've decided to leave the side of my house open to it. I'll fence enough to secure my dog in our backyard, but I want my family to be able to step right into the reserve whenever we want. So now there's this simmering standoff. The neighbors believe they bought a house with a secret half-acre bonus yard. I believe I've just as much right to let my kids run around in the reserve as they do, because it's not theirs. And the more they push, the firmer I'm going to be about standing my ground. That's where this story ends. This one really highlights how people assume they're entitled to whatever perks the previous owners had. Even if those perks weren't legitimate, the neighbors expected an extra half-acre, but the narrator's point is solid. It was never theirs to begin with. What stood out is how quickly a chunk of forgotten council land turned into a neighborhood turf war. This next story is about a dad whose wealthy sister stepped into a motherly role for his daughter, and now his new wife and stepdaughter are angry because they think the sister should treat both girls equally. I have a 14-year-old daughter from my first marriage. When my ex-wife got remarried, she basically stepped back from our daughter's life. She stopped being involved in any meaningful way, and that left a huge hole. My daughter needed someone to fill that role, and that's where my sister came in. My sister doesn't have children of her own, and she happens to be very wealthy. She adores my daughter. Over the years, she's stepped into a kind of mom role, doting on her, spoiling her, and being the kind of steady adult figure that my daughter was missing. I'll admit she goes above and beyond sometimes, but it comes from a place of love. She sees my daughter as the child she never got to have, and my daughter thrives under that attention. Recently, I got remarried. My wife has a 15-year-old daughter from her previous marriage. She and I have been trying to blend our families, which is always a complicated process. My wife and her daughter have noticed the bond between my daughter and my sister, and it's made them very jealous. They complain a lot about how close the two are. I've tried explaining that my sister is like a second mom to my daughter, especially since her real mom checked out years ago, but my wife doesn't want to hear it. The tension came to a head on my daughter's 14th birthday. My sister showed up with so many gifts, I lost count. There were bags and boxes, clothes, gadgets, just a mountain of things. On the other hand, a few months earlier, for my stepdaughter's 15th birthday, my sister gave her a 3-month gym membership. It wasn't a bad gift at all. My stepdaughter had been showing a lot of interest in working out, and the gym is a really high-end place. In fact, my sister also pays for my daughter to go there, and the cost is about $750 for 3 months. That's not cheap. So, in my eyes, it was a thoughtful and generous gift. But my wife and stepdaughter see things differently. They look at the sheer volume of gifts my daughter got compared to the one gift my stepdaughter received, and they feel like it's unfair. They say the difference makes them feel slighted, like my sister doesn't care about my stepdaughter. Now they want me to intervene. They think I should tell my sister she has to treat both girls equally or stop seeing my daughter altogether. That's where I drew the line. I told them no. My sister has been there for my daughter in ways no one else has. She's more than an aunt. She's basically been a surrogate mother for years. Asking her to dial that back or cutting off that relationship completely would hurt my daughter in ways I can't accept. My wife and stepdaughter didn't take that well. They said I'm an asshole for siding with my sister, for not standing up for my stepdaughter, and for allowing this favoritism to go unchecked. But to me, it's not favoritism. It's a unique bond that came out of necessity. My daughter lost her mom, and my sister filled that void. My stepdaughter still has her mom in her life, and while it may not look the same, she isn't missing that parental presence. From where I stand, I can't ask my sister to stop loving and spoiling my daughter just because it makes my wife and stepdaughter uncomfortable. That would punish my daughter for circumstances she had no control over. That story wraps up here. This is another story that really shows how complicated blended families can get. On one hand, it makes sense that the stepdaughter would feel left out when there's such a big difference in gifts. But on the other hand, the sister's role in the daughter's life is unique and deeply important. What stands out most is how much of this conflict isn't really about presence at all. It's about love, history, and the gaps left behind when a parent walks away. This next story is about someone who was made miserable by a stranger smoking in a tiny public restroom, and who got a quick, petty bit of revenge by pretending to have a severe breathing problem. I would like to preface this by apologizing if anyone with a real asthma diagnosis feels uncomfortable. I do not have that diagnosis yet, and what I have is a violent allergy-like reaction to smoke. When smoke hits me, I cough like I'm trying to expel a vital organ. I've had times where coughing triggered a gag reflex so hard I nearly upchucked. I don't know why my body reacts like this, but it has for years. A few years back, I had an especially nasty head cold. It came with coughing fits that sounded, to everyone around me, like I needed someone to call 911. Even by my usual standards, the coughing was dreadful. My chest felt raw, my throat rasped, and each cough left me winded for a long beat. It was one of those colds that makes you miserable in a way that nothing else does. During that week, I went out to a diner with friends. It was a casual night, greasy plates, clinking silverware, the low hum of conversation. At some point, I excused myself to use the restroom. In the United States, smoking isn't allowed in restaurants or public restrooms, but rules don't always stop everyone. The restroom had 3 stalls, and to my surprise, the middle stall was occupied by someone actively smoking. I didn't have a choice. To get to a free stall, I had to pick one right next to them. When I stepped into the stall beside the smoker, the air was already thin with nicotine. Even without my cold, the smell would have made me cough. With the cold, it was instantly worse. The smoke hit like acid. My throat clenched, my eyes watered, and I started coughing. The kind of cough that echoed off tile and made people glance up in alarm when it wasn't in a bathroom. Each cough felt like it ripped something inside me. I coughed so hard I was afraid I might vomit. In between hacks, I grumbled, loud enough so the person next to me could hear. I wanted them to feel as miserable as I did. I didn't want to call them out outright, in front of our friends, or in the crowded diner. Instead, I chose a line that anyone would associate with a bad breathing spell. "Oh, this blasted asthma," I muttered. I didn't know if she'd hear me. I didn't know if she'd care. Almost immediately, the level of smoke started to drop. The woman in the middle stall flushed, and then she hurriedly finished up, as if the restroom had suddenly become a noxious chamber. She left in a hurry, face a little pale, looking like someone who'd been caught doing something they shouldn't. I couldn't help but feel a small satisfaction at that. Not cruel, but a sense of justice that someone who chose to break the rules would have to face a consequence, however minor. Later, sitting back at the table, I couldn't help replaying the moment in my head. I told myself I didn't deserve to feel guilty. After all, she was the one who'd chosen to smoke where it was prohibited, and I was the one who had to suffer for it. But there was also a tiny nudge of conscience. I had lied about having asthma. That unsettled me a little because I know there are people with real, life-threatening asthma who could have been harmed by that smoke, and they wouldn't deserve to have someone fake. At the time, though, I focused on the immediate result. The woman was gone and the air cleared. For the rest of the meal, I felt better physically, and also just a little triumphant. She probably thought twice about ever smoking in a public restroom again. Maybe, I rationalized, I'd help prevent her from doing it again. And if that prevented a real asthma attack for someone else someday, then the small lie felt worth it. Thinking back on it now, I'm still not racked with guilt. The bathroom was a small space, and smoking there was reckless. It put other people's health at risk. My reaction was instinctive. I wanted relief fast. and I did what worked in the moment. I don't glorify the lie, but I also don't regret the outcome. The woman left, and I didn't have to spend the rest of the night hacking and feeling like someone had shoved a rag down my throat. There are a few things that stand out to me about that evening beyond the immediate, petty revenge. One is how quickly people can be shamed into changing their behavior when they think they've caused real harm. Another is how small, private actions can have ripple effects. Maybe she quit smoking in bathrooms after that. Maybe she simply felt embarrassed and didn't do it again. Maybe she didn't care and smoked somewhere else. I honestly don't know. The point is, it was a tiny moment where I used a small S. I also can't help thinking about the moral gray area I stepped into. People lie in the heat of the moment all the time, and usually it's because something about the situation pushes them to. In my case, it wasn't a grand moral stand. It was annoyance combined with vulnerability. I was sick, I was suffering, and I wanted the discomfort to stop. That's not noble, but it's real. It's a human reaction. As for the person who smoked, I picture her hurrying out, maybe a little alarmed, promising herself not to do that again. Maybe she was having a rough day, needed a cigarette, and made a bad call. People are messy, so am I. My lie wasn't a heroic act, but it wasn't harmless either, and that's a tension I still lean into when I tell the story. In the end, I don't feel bad about making her feel 2 inches tall for a moment. If my small deception kept her from smoking in a bathroom again, and therefore prevented someone with actual asthma from being harmed someday, then it feels like a small net positive. I recognize that had I been confronted by someone who actually had severe asthma, it would have been cruel and dangerous to pretend, and I'm very careful about that now. But in that diner bathroom, when I was hacking and feeling helpless, I did what I needed to do to make it stop. That's where the story finishes. That kind of tiny, petty victory lands in a weird spot. Part relief, part awkward. It's simple and immediate, which is probably why it felt so satisfying in the moment. I think most folks listening can relate to being desperate for the discomfort to end and doing whatever gets the job done. It's messy, not noble, but honestly kind of human. Moving on from it, you hold on to the result and maybe also the little lesson about how quick reactions can sit in a moral gray area. This next story is about a woman who uncovered a hidden box in the attic and learned that the father who raised her wasn't her biological dad, a secret her entire family had been keeping from her for years. I'm 26 years old, and up until just recently, I thought my family was pretty normal, nothing out of the ordinary. I grew up with my mom, my dad, and my older brother. We had the usual ups and downs, but overall, life felt steady. I never once suspected that there was some huge secret lingering under the surface. That changed a couple of weeks ago when I was helping my mom clean out the attic. My grandma had just passed, and we were sorting through boxes of old belongings, photos, and keepsakes. Most of it was the usual kind of clutter you'd expect. Holiday decorations, stacks of old papers, faded photographs of people I didn't even recognize. Then I stumbled across one box that caught my attention. It looked ordinary enough at first, just a cardboard box with some envelopes inside. But when I pulled one open and started reading, my entire world tilted on its axis. The letters weren't from my dad. They were from another man. A man who, as the letters revealed, my mom had been involved with years ago. Tucked inside the box were pictures of the two of them together, smiling, posing, and buried among the letters was something that hit harder than anything else. A paternity test from the year I was born. That test showed the truth. My dad, the man who raised me, who I had always believed was my biological father, wasn't. The man in those letters was. For a long moment, I just sat there in the attic, holding the paper in my hands, staring at those words and not knowing how to breathe. A part of me wanted to believe I was misreading it, that maybe it wasn't real, but the evidence was right there in front of me. The pictures, the letters, the test, it was undeniable. I didn't know what to do. My first thought was that maybe my dad had never known. Maybe he had been just as much in the dark as I was. But when I confronted my mom, I found out quickly that wasn't the case. He had known the whole time. Not only that, but so had my brother. When I asked my mom about it, she broke down crying. She told me she had kept it from me to protect the family. She said the man who was technically my biological father had been a deadbeat, someone who left town and never looked back. She claimed she wanted me to grow up safe and stable. with the dad I already had, rather than knowing about someone who would only disappoint me. My dad, or at least the man I had always called dad, wasn't exactly sympathetic when I confronted him. He got defensive. He told me blood doesn't matter, that he's the one who raised me, and that should be enough. He insisted I was overreacting, digging up things that didn't need to be brought into the light. The betrayal that really stung, though, came from my brother. We'd always been close, or so I thought. I always believed I could count on him, but when I pressed him, he admitted he'd known for years. He told me mom and dad had sworn him to secrecy, made him promise not to tell me, and he went along with it. All that time we spent together, all those years of trust, and he kept this massive truth from me. Now I can't stop replaying everything in my head. Every childhood memory feels warped. Every family moment feels like it had a shadow behind it I didn't know about. I feel like my entire life has been built on a lie. Since finding out, I haven't been able to look at them the same way. I left the house and started crashing at a friend's place just to get some distance. Nights are the worst. I toss and turn, my brain running in circles, replaying the discovery, replaying the conversations, replaying the way my dad looked at me when he said, "Blood doesn't matter." I want to believe him. I want to believe that the man who raised me is enough, that he's still my dad. But how do you reconcile that with the fact that he kept something so huge from me? How do you forgive a secret like that? Part of me wants to track down my biological father, just to get answers, just to see for myself who he is. But then another part of me is terrified. What if he really is as bad as my mom says? What if I find him and he turns out to be a disappointment, or worse? Do I even want to open that door? I keep cycling between anger, sadness, and confusion. Anger at my mom for lying. Anger at my dad for hiding it. Anger at my brother for not telling me. Sadness because the family I thought I had doesn't feel real anymore. Confusion because I don't know what steps to take next. The hardest part is the feeling of isolation. It's like the people closest to me chose to build a wall and keep me on the outside of it for my entire life. They all shared this truth, and I was the only one who didn't know. That cuts deeper than anything else. For now, all I can do is sit with it, try to process, try to figure out whether forgiveness is even possible. Some days I think maybe I'll get there eventually. Other days, it feels impossible. Right now, I just needed to get it off my chest, because holding it in has been eating me alive. That story stops there. That's such a heavy thing to have land on your shoulders out of nowhere. It's crazy how one discovery can shift the way you see your whole past. Sometimes it's not even about the secret itself, but about the trust that broke when it came out. Hearing this, you can really feel how raw and confusing it must be. This next story is about someone who showed up right on time for a job interview at a police department, only to be turned away because a woman claimed they were 2 minutes late. I had an interview lined up for a desk position at a police department, and I did everything I could to make sure I was there on time. I planned the route, gave myself extra room for traffic, and pulled up to the building right when I was supposed to. In fact, as I walked in, the receptionist was just taking down the "Sorry, we're closed" sign from the front window. I stepped inside, let her know I was there for my appointment, and she went to the back to get someone. I hadn't even had time to sit down before another woman walked up to the window. She didn't smile, didn't ask for my name. She just looked at me and said, "You're late, so we're unable to proceed with the interview." I was caught completely off guard. I wasn't late. I was standing there at the exact scheduled time. The only thing that had passed was the couple of minutes it took for the receptionist to grab someone from the back. I tried to explain this, saying I'd arrived on time, but the woman doubled down. She told me again that I was 2 minutes late, and because of that, the interview was canceled. There was nothing I could do. I didn't get to shake anyone's hand, didn't get to introduce myself, didn't even get a chance to explain who I was beyond telling the receptionist I was there for the interview. I just turned around and left the building, stunned. Later, I called the department and spoke to the person who had originally scheduled my interview. They told me they already knew about what had happened, because the woman had relayed it to them. I asked if I was still being considered for the position, but they told me they weren't the one making that decision. They said they could forward me to the lieutenant who was in charge, but when they tried, there was no answer. The lieutenant was away from their desk. I didn't want to just let it go, so I followed up with an email. I laid out the situation clearly. I had arrived at the scheduled time, not late, and I wanted that on record. I don't know if anything will come from it. Maybe no one will ever even reply. but at least I said my piece. The whole thing felt like a massive waste of time. All the preparation, the nerves, the effort it takes to get ready for an interview, only to be turned away at the door without a chance to say a word. What was the point? The more I think about it, the more I wonder if it had nothing to do with time at all. Maybe the woman didn't like the look of me. Maybe she was having a bad day. Maybe she just didn't want to be bothered and used, "You're 2 minutes late," as an excuse. She wasn't even in uniform, so I couldn't tell if she was part of the department or just some kind of staff member. Whoever she was, she had the authority to shut me down before I got started. On the other hand, I've heard that some bureaucratic places can be extremely strict about punctuality. Maybe to them being there right on the dot isn't good enough. Maybe they expect you to show up 10 minutes early just to prove you're serious. But even that logic doesn't sit right with me, because, as I mentioned, they had literally been closed up until the moment I walked in. If I had arrived any earlier, I would have just been standing outside. It left me feeling frustrated and powerless. There's no way to appeal something like that, no chance to clear it up in the moment. I was judged in an instant, dismissed in an instant, and left without an opportunity to even explain myself. I don't know what will happen with the email I sent. Maybe I'll get another shot. Maybe I won't. But the whole experience left me questioning the process. If this is how they treat people who show up on time for an interview, what does that say about how they handle things on the inside? That's where the story ends. That's just rough. 2 minutes isn't even late. It's basically right on time. It feels like the decision was already made before you walked through the door, and they just use that as an excuse. Honestly, if that's how they treat applicants, maybe that place wasn't worth working at in the first place. This next story is about a woman whose courthouse wedding ended up falling on the 1-year anniversary of her brother-in-law's engagement, and now he insists that she stole his date. My husband and I got engaged back in December of 2018. Life moved along, and in September of 2021, his brother and girlfriend got engaged. At the time, my husband and his brother weren't particularly close, so there wasn't much communication between them. And honestly, during that whole time, his brother never mentioned any specific wedding plans to anyone in the family. Fast forward to 2022. I was about to turn 26, and there was a practical reason pushing us to finally tie the knot. I needed to get on my husband's health insurance. At that point, our daughter was 5 months old, and we didn't feel like planning anything elaborate. So we just decided, almost on a whim, to get married at the courthouse the following week. It was simple, fast, and stress-free. The only people there were my parents and my mother-in-law. Here's where the conflict comes in. We ended up picking a random date for our courthouse wedding. Later on, it turned out that the date we chose happened to be the 1-year anniversary of my brother-in-law's engagement, not the day they actually got engaged. The 1-year anniversary of that engagement, which, honestly, I didn't even realize was something people celebrated in the first place. It wasn't intentional, it wasn't personal. It was just the date we picked because it worked. Since then, this has somehow become a recurring point of drama in the family. My husband recently tried to reach out to his brother in an attempt to repair their strained relationship, but when they started talking again, the wedding date issue immediately came up. According to my brother-in-law, that's the main reason the two of them are estranged. He went off on a rant, saying that we should have invited him and his fiancée to the wedding, even though at the time they weren't really on speaking terms with us, and the whole thing was a spur-of-the-moment courthouse ceremony. He also made it clear that the date was his biggest issue. He claimed that we got married without telling them, and that we took the engagement anniversary date that they had been planning to use for their wedding day. Here's the kicker. They never told anyone in the family that they wanted to use that date. Nobody knew. We certainly didn't. To us, it was just another day on the calendar. But to hear him tell it, this was some kind of intentional slight, as if we carefully chose their engagement anniversary just to make a point. He even said, "I still, to this day, don't believe this was ever given the consideration or acknowledgement it deserves," as we stare at a constant reminder on our wall with our engagement date and photos. That's a direct quote. And all I could think was, are you serious? It wasn't their wedding date. It wasn't even a shared birthday or holiday. It was just the 1-year mark of the day they got engaged. From where I'm standing, it feels like a complete overreaction. We weren't trying to disrespect them. We weren't even thinking about them. We had practical reasons for picking the date, and it worked for us. If anything, it's frustrating because it feels like they're turning something so small into the centerpiece of a family rift. The whole situation has left me questioning if I'm crazy for thinking this is ridiculous, but deep down, I don't think I am. Getting married on the anniversary of someone else's engagement, especially when you didn't even know it was their special date, doesn't seem like an offense worth holding on to for years. That story wraps up here. That really does sound blown way out of proportion. An engagement anniversary isn't exactly a date most people guard like a wedding day. It feels like the brother-in-law just needed something to pin the blame on, and that random courthouse date became the excuse. Sometimes people just want to stay mad, even if the reason doesn't make sense. This next story is about a student who cooked a big farewell dinner for his flatmates, only to be told afterward that he should have made a vegetarian dish for one guest who wasn't originally part of the plan. I'm 29 and currently living in a flat share with 4 other students, all in our 20s. I'm moving out next month, so as a way to say goodbye, I decided to cook a last supper for my flatmates. I thought it would be nice to do something special, a proper sit-down meal, good food, and good company before I left. I let everyone know in our WhatsApp group that I would be cooking dinner and asked which date would work best for everyone. I also mentioned that I'd be inviting 2 former flatmates who are friends of ours, if they were available. One of them confirmed. None of us have any dietary restrictions, so I planned out a full 5-course non-vegetarian meal for 6 people, myself, my 4 flatmates, and the 1 confirmed friend. I went shopping for groceries, picked up wine, and even prepped the starter ahead of time so I could freeze it and not be stressed out on the day. We live in Germany, where everything is closed on Sundays, including supermarkets. So, by Saturday afternoon, I had everything ready. The chicken was marinating, dessert was prepped, and I had my plan locked in. That's when one of my flatmates, Dev, messaged me. He asked if his girlfriend could join us. I said sure, no problem, but I also knew she was vegetarian. I explained that I hadn't planned anything vegetarian except for the salad, bread, and dessert, which already contained egg. I told him she'd at least be able to have some of the chicken sauce with bread. He said that was fine. I did consider going out to buy something else for her, but honestly, I was exhausted, and the nearest store is a 20-minute walk. On top of that, we only buy groceries weekly, and I was heading on vacation soon, so I didn't want to stock up on food I wouldn't use. Sunday came, and I started cooking at 2 o'clock for our 6 o'clock dinner. I put a lot of effort into it, prepping, timing everything, making sure the courses would flow nicely. My flatmates helped set the table, but I kept the kitchen to myself so I could manage everything smoothly. Everyone arrived on time, and the atmosphere was great. We had music playing, conversation flowing, and then the food began. First the starter, then the soup. Dev's girlfriend declined both, saying she'd just wait for the salad. That meant she sat for a while as we ate through the first 2 courses. I felt a little bad, but at the same time, I had been clear about what I was making. When we got to the main course, the dish was still in the oven, so I kept it warm until everyone was ready. I wanted us all to eat together rather than serving things separately. For the main, she ended up having just the gravy with bread, since the chicken itself was off the table for her. Again, I did feel bad seeing her plate look so minimal, but it was what I had told Dev beforehand. She didn't complain at all. We finished with dessert, 6 bowls of rice pudding, 1 for each of us. Since she hadn't been counted in the original number, her boyfriend and I shared ours with her. After dinner, she even offered to make espresso for everyone, which we all accepted. Then we took our wine out to the balcony, all 7 of us enjoying the evening air. But then, after the couple went back inside, one of my flatmates, Fabio, turned to me. He said, "The food was great, but you should have made something for her, so she had more than bread and sauce." I reminded him that I had informed everyone in advance, including Dev. We argued a little because I felt frustrated. I had spent a lot of effort, time, and money to make the evening special, and hearing that criticism at the end felt unfair. Fabio argued that even if people say they're okay with it, it's still respectful to make sure a guest with dietary preferences has at least one proper option. I was tired at that point, and the comment really took the wind out of my sails. I ended up going to my room, annoyed that my attempt at a nice evening had ended on a sour note. Later, Fabio apologized, and I accepted it, but it still stung that my farewell dinner ended with that shadow over it. That's where the story ends. What's tough here is that the dinner itself went well. Everyone enjoyed the food and the guests never complained. But sometimes all it takes is one casual remark afterward to dull the whole vibe, even when the night was mostly a success. In the end, the effort put in still made the evening memorable, even if the last note wasn't perfect. This next story is about a woman in the restaurant industry who finally told her husband she won't keep showing up late to Thanksgiving dinners where she isn't treated like part of the table. I'm 40 years old, and I've been with my husband for more than 2 decades, married for 15 of those years. Through all that time, I've worked in the restaurant and grocery industry. It's a tough business, especially around the holidays. When most people are off celebrating with their families, I'm usually clocking long days and weekends, helping to keep things running while everyone else shops, cooks, and dines. Because of that, I've always tried to be easygoing about missing family gatherings or showing up late. I understood that my schedule wasn't traditional, and I didn't want to be the reason others couldn't celebrate when they wanted. But over the years, I've asked my husband for one very simple thing. When his family plans Thanksgiving, could they please consider my work schedule? I get off by 4:30 and can be at their house by 5 o'clock or 5:15. That would let me actually sit down at the table and share the meal, instead of arriving to scraps after everyone else has already eaten. I've been making that request for more than 7 years. Every time Thanksgiving rolls around, I bring it up, and every year it seems to fall on deaf ears. They plan the dinner for earlier in the day, start without me, and by the time I walk in, the meal has already been picked over 2 or 3 times. The food is lukewarm, and often there isn't even a chair saved for me. It's a small thing, but after years of experiencing it, it makes me feel like an outsider, like my presence at the table doesn't really matter. This year, as planning season began, I decided to be more direct. I told my husband plainly, I know the family will start organizing Thanksgiving soon, and I want him to speak up. I want to sit down with him, our kids, and his family, and actually share a meal together. But if things go the same way they always do, if I walk into the same cold food and empty place setting, then that's not a table I need to be at. I said I would simply not attend. His response was short, just, okay. No conversation, no effort to reassure me, no promise to advocate on my behalf. And yes, it upset him, but not enough to actually talk about it. For me, it's not about the food. I cook a full Thanksgiving meal myself the day after, turkey and all the fixings. I'm a chef, and I know my way around a holiday spread. The meal itself isn't the point. I choose to prioritize spending Thanksgiving with my husband's family because my own family is not in the picture, for reasons I won't get into here. My kids only have one living grandparent, plus an aunt, uncle, and cousins on my husband's side. I want them to have those relationships, to grow up feeling connected to their extended family. I've even encouraged my husband to repair his own strained relationship with them over the years. I've supported him in mending old rifts, being present, and making family a priority. And yet, after all that effort, I'm still treated like an afterthought. No seat saved, no plate set aside, no consideration of my schedule. It's like I'm invisible when it comes time to gather. I can't ignore how that feels anymore. It hurts to realize that after helping everyone else build and maintain their connections, mine still doesn't exist in their eyes. I've chosen to put my kids first to make sure they have those bonds I never had growing up, but I can't keep sacrificing my own sense of belonging just to sit at a table where I'm not really welcome. So this year, I drew a line. If my wishes aren't considered, if I'm once again left walking into a meal that's already over, then I won't attend. It's not about being dramatic, and it's not about punishing anyone. It's about protecting my own dignity and finally saying out loud what I've felt for years. That's the end of this story. That sounds like years of being overlooked finally catching up all at once. It's not really about the food or the time. It's about wanting to feel like your presence matters at the table. Sometimes standing up for yourself means risking conflict, but it also means being honest about what you need. This next story is about a woman who had been carrying most of the household and financial responsibilities while living with her brother until an argument pushed her over the edge. I'm 34, and right now I live with my 39-year-old brother. For the past couple of years, our arrangement has worked only because I've done most of the heavy lifting. But recently, after a big argument, I decided to stop playing the role of housekeeper, provider, and peacemaker. The fight started because someone I thought I could trust betrayed me. I had vented to this person about frustrations I had with my brother, thinking it was safe. Instead, they repeated everything to him. When he confronted me, I admitted what I had said. I wasn't trying to be sneaky. I just hadn't told him directly because, in the past, bringing up issues didn't lead to real change. He'd nod along and agree with me, but then nothing would happen. Even before all of this, I had already decided I was going to move out. My 4-year-old daughter and I share a room, and she's growing fast. Space was becoming too tight. On top of that, I wanted independence. I had started working on securing a better paying job, and with that in place, I knew I could afford to move before the end of 2025. The argument just made me more motivated to get out sooner. My brother accused me of talking behind his back, as though I was trying to get him in trouble. The truth was, I just answered people's questions honestly. I can't control how others twist my words. He also claimed I didn't have his back, and that was the breaking point for me. For the past 2 years, I've carried most of the weight in this apartment. I've been the one buying groceries, toiletries, cleaning supplies, cat food, and litter. For both cats, not just mine. I cooked, I cleaned, and I made sure the home was running. His contributions? He gave me grocery money one time, $50. Meanwhile, he found time to complain. He didn't like how much toilet paper my daughter used, as if a 4-year-old learning independence was some kind of financial burden. He grumbled when there wasn't enough meat in the house, or when the trash hadn't been taken out, all while barely lifting a finger himself. Financially, I've carried more too. We split rent, but I also helped with electricity, renter's insurance, and internet, bills he never touched. When he was short on his half of the rent, I covered it. When his car broke down, I helped fix it, then drove him to work for 5 months. Sometimes that meant waking up at 2 in the morning on weekends so he could make his shift. Not once did I ask him for gas money, because I thought he needed to save up to get his car fixed. So when he told me I didn't have his back, I stopped showing him what having his back looked like. I went through the apartment and gathered up everything I had paid for. Towels, laundry detergent, cleaning supplies, bathroom items, even the photos I'd purchased and printed. All of it went into my room. I pulled out the kitchen items and separated the food I bought. The apartment looked bare almost instantly, because in truth, I had been providing nearly everything. Now, when my daughter and I need something, we take it from my room, use it, and bring it back. I've already started packing things I don't need immediately, so I can be ready to move. Looking back, I realized just how much I gave. I fed his kids when they visited on weekends. 5 people in total for 2 days, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Before that, when his oldest lived with us, I fed 4 people all week. I even bought clothes for his kids, because I love them like they're my own. But eventually, I had to stop cooking for everyone, stop cleaning up after everyone, and stop paying for everyone. It's frustrating that one mistake, venting to the wrong person, erased everything I had done in his eyes. He couldn't see the years of support, sacrifice, and effort. All he saw was that I'd spoken about him to someone else. I still love him. I worry about him, especially because he's diabetic. But I can't keep giving until I feel like I'm drowning. The upside is that I've started focusing on myself more. Even with money being tight while I prepare to move, I've found small ways to take care of myself. Getting my nails or toes done, treating my daughter to a pedicure with me, little things that make life feel lighter. It feels like a weight has lifted, like I can finally breathe again. I know my brother and my daughter will keep their relationship, and that's important to me. I also know that my relationship with him will never be the same. We've started talking again, but I stay guarded. I don't plan to share where I move, not with him and not with most people. My daughter will still see her uncle, but I'm done being the unpaid mom, sister, and housekeeper in a place that doesn't appreciate me. That's where the story ends. That's a tough situation, but it really highlights how one-sided things had become. Pulling back and keeping what you've bought to yourself feels like a natural response when your efforts have gone unrecognized for so long. Sometimes it takes those boundaries to make space for your own peace. This next story is about neighbors whose friendship completely fell apart after hidden resentments over parking, property access, and even kids' toys finally boiled over. For years, I thought we got along fine with our neighbors. We'd wave, chat occasionally, and there was never any sign of hostility. But everything changed once they put their house on the market. At first, I figured they were just moving on with life. Instead, it quickly turned into a list of complaints I never expected. They started telling us why their house wasn't selling. According to them, potential buyers didn't like the sight of our kids' play equipment. They didn't like the trampoline. They thought the parking was too tight, the horses in the yard were an issue, and even that our garden looked too messy. It was like every little thing about how we lived was suddenly up for criticism. Eventually, it all came to a head. They told us point blank that we were the worst neighbors they'd ever had, and even went so far as to say we were too poor to live in our own property. That one stung. I didn't even know they'd been holding on to all this resentment until it came spewing out all at once. One of the main issues they raised was our cars. They said they were too big, that they stuck out too far on the drive. The thing is, the drive is legally ours. They only have a right of access over a section of it. The deeds don't mention parking at all. It's strictly vehicle and pedestrian right of way. They actually have their own garage and a small parking space on their property. Meanwhile, we're very careful. We only ever park on the section of the drive that isn't part of their right of way. That spot used to be part of our front garden before we converted it into parking. To be clear, I even showed them the deeds and boundaries to prove we were in the right, but they dismissed me completely. And that's when all their built-up anger came pouring out. At least now I know where we stand with them. What makes this more frustrating is that their visitors regularly park on our drive. Estate agents, prospective buyers, random guests, you name it. None of them technically have any rights to do that. We've never once raised an issue trying to be neighborly, but after all this, it feels unfair. Fast forward a bit, and they ended up dropping their house price by a whopping £125,000. Honestly, I think the real reason they weren't selling before is that they had priced it way too high. Now apparently they've found a buyer. Here's where things get tricky. I have no idea what arrangements they've shared with that buyer, but I'm fairly sure they haven't been upfront about the parking issue. From my perspective, it's better for us if it's made clear now, rather than me having to explain it to new neighbors after they've already moved in. But at the same time, I don't want to be accused of obstructing their sale. I don't know if there's even a way to make sure it's flagged during conveyancing, or if I just have to sit back and wait. The reason I care so much is simple. Parking on the right of way creates problems. It tightens the turning circle, and since we live on a busy road, that's dangerous. I also own a trailer, and I need that space clear so I can maneuver it properly. Beyond that, I worry that if I let people park there once or twice, it'll eventually turn into an assumed right. And on top of all that, we've got animals. I'm often crossing the drive with a wheelbarrow or equipment, and I need the space open. For context, the exact wording in the deed says this: property to the north, the right, A, to pass and repass over and along the driveway, colored brown on the said plan for the purpose of gaining access to and egress from the said property, to the north, upon payment of a proportionate part of the expense of keeping the same in repair. So it's crystal clear to me. It's a right of way, not a right to park. But that hasn't stopped this entire situation from spiraling. That's where the story ends. That whole neighbor situation sounds like such a headache. It's wild how fast people can flip from being friendly to outright hostile once money and property are involved. Honestly, the most surprising part is how many little grudges they've been holding on to for years without saying anything. Makes you wonder what the new neighbors will be like once they move in. This next story is about a family who hosted a wedding at their home, only to clash with the maid of honor after she insulted their effort, culture, and traditions. The wedding wasn't held at some fancy venue. It wasn't a place with chandeliers, air-conditioned ballrooms, or staff waiting to refill champagne glasses. It was held at my parents' home, the place where our family has lived and celebrated life for over 3 decades. The couple chose it because it mattered to them, not because it came with a package deal. This was the house where my cousins and I grew up. It's where my kids played, where my brother still comes on Sundays for laundry and a meal, where my grandkids run barefoot in the yard, and where 4 generations have laughed and grieved together. Out back, behind the house, stands a cedar tree line, 40 feet tall and 250 feet wide. We've watched sunsets behind those trees through every season of life. That's the backdrop they wanted. That's why it was sacred. So, when the maid of honor wrinkled her nose and complained about how things looked, I couldn't believe it. She walked into the house and criticized the decorations, calling them homemade. Well, of course they were homemade. Our cousins had spent weeks cutting, painting, gluing, and stringing things together. They burned their fingers on hot glue guns and stained their clothes with paint, bending over tables late into the night just to make everything special. The porch she stood on had been repainted to match the colors of the wedding. The garden she dismissed so easily had been weeded and watered by my 71-year-old mother every single day. The acre of land beneath her feet had been mowed faithfully by my almost 80-year-old father, and he even did it an extra time just for the wedding. The food wasn't from some banquet kitchen either. It was cooked by us, in our kitchens, with our family recipes, seasoned with care. And yes, the air conditioning struggled, and there weren't enough bathrooms for 100 people. But this is Texas in September. Even the dragonflies don't stay where you want them to. We stretched a home meant for 5 to welcome 100, and we did it gladly. The maid of honor still found a way to complain. She scoffed at the music, annoyed when the DJ played boleros and cumbias, but he wasn't hired for her. He was hired to celebrate the couple and honor the culture that raised them. In our family, music isn't background noise. It's memory. It's tradition. It's inheritance. So when she wrinkled her nose at it, she wasn't just critiquing a playlist. She was dismissing an entire lineage of joy. What made it worse was her lack of presence. She showed up in time for the bachelorette party, which was paid for and planned by the groom's mother, but she never even saw the house until the day before the wedding. And instead of gratitude or help, she brought critique. She actually argued with me about the sun, the very sun I've been watching set in this yard my entire life. She stood there, new to the space, and thought she knew better than someone who has lived beneath those trees for decades. That's when it hit me. Everything she found fault with was built on sacrifice and love. Family gave their time, their labor, and their hearts to create something meaningful. What we needed from her wasn't complaints. It wasn't some Yelp-style review. What we needed was grace, gratitude, a little respect for what was given freely. Our family isn't rich in money, and we don't pretend to be, but we are rich in loyalty, in sacrifice, in traditions that stretch across generations. We welcomed her in with open arms. But when someone sits in my mother's chair, under the trees my father still cares for every week, and dismisses it as though it isn't good enough, we notice. And trust me when I say, we don't forget. Oh, and one last thing. She walked off with every strip of fashion tape I brought for the bridal party, 100 strips in total. To this day, I still wonder, was that really necessary? Or was that what it took to hold her audacity in place the entire evening? That story wraps up here. That one had a lot of fire behind it. You could just feel how much love and work went into making that wedding happen. It's crazy how one person can walk into something beautiful and only see flaws. Honestly, it says way more about her than it ever did about the family or the house. This next story is about a train passenger who clashed with careless parents after their kid spent the entire ride kicking, throwing, and even hitting him. I was traveling last weekend on a long-distance train, and right from the start, it was shaping up to be one of those nightmare trips. The train was delayed, the cars were overcrowded, and everyone looked tired and frustrated. I had at least managed to reserve a seat ahead of time, which felt like a small victory in the chaos. But when I finally got to my spot, there was already a family of 3 sitting in it, mom, dad, and a little boy, who looked maybe 7 or 8 years old. I tried to stay polite. I showed them my ticket, pointed out that it was my reserved seat, and asked them to move. They shifted over without much fuss, but it was clear from their body language they weren't thrilled about it. I settled in, thinking the worst of the trip was already behind me. Turns out it was just beginning. Not even a minute after sitting down, I felt the first kick against the back of my seat. At first I brushed it off, thinking maybe it was just an accident, but then came another kick, and another. Before long it was nonstop, this rhythmic thumping against my back. I tried to ignore it. I pulled out my phone, adjusted my posture, even tried to focus on the scenery outside the window, but the kicking just kept going. Finally, I turned around, looked at the parents, and as calmly as I could, asked if they could please have their son stop. They smiled at me, shrugged, and said, "He's just energetic. He'll calm down." Except he didn't calm down. He only seemed to ramp up. An hour into the trip, just when I thought maybe he'd burned himself out, I suddenly felt something cold and sticky hit the back of my head. I froze for a second, not sure what had just happened, until I realized he had thrown his juice box at me. Orange liquid splattered down the back of my shirt, soaking in. And of course I was wearing a brand new white Lacoste crewneck tee. You can imagine the mess. That's when I snapped. I turned around sharply and told the parents this was completely unacceptable. Instead of apologizing, they rolled their eyes at me like I was being dramatic. The mom said, "Have some empathy, he's just a child." Meanwhile, I was sitting there sticky, uncomfortable, and already furious. A few minutes later, as if to prove how little control they had, the kid tried climbing over the seats. In the process, he smacked me on the arm. That was it for me. I stood up, flagged down the conductor, and explained everything that had been happening from the moment I sat down. The parents immediately went into defensive mode. They raised their voices, claiming I was harassing a child. But luckily, other passengers around us spoke up. They confirmed that they'd seen the whole thing. The kicking, the juice box, the hitting. The conductor didn't waste time. He told the parents plainly that they either needed to control their son or they'd have to get off at the next station. The dad started shouting about discrimination, demanding that it wasn't fair. But the decision was already made. When the train pulled into the next stop, the family was escorted off. The car finally went quiet and I could breathe again. Later, though, I started to hear different opinions. Some people told me I was right to speak up, but others, including my girlfriend, said I had overreacted. Her take was that I should have just sucked it up, that kids are kids, and you can't expect them to behave perfectly. But here's how I see it. Kids might make noise, sure, but I shouldn't have to endure being kicked, hit, and covered in juice for hours just because parents don't feel like parenting. That story ends there. That's honestly such a rough situation. There's a big difference between a kid just being restless and parents completely checking out. I can't imagine anyone being happy about getting juice spilled all over them, especially on a white shirt. Sometimes it feels like people forget trains are shared spaces, not daycare centers on wheels. This next story is about two roommates whose constant conflict over stolen food led one of them to set up a very messy kind of revenge. I've been living with this girl for close to a year now. We weren't close friends before moving in together, just acquaintances who both needed a place to stay and figured it would make sense financially to split the rent. At first, everything seemed fine. We bought some groceries together, cooked meals side by side now and then, and for a while, the arrangement actually felt manageable. But over time, things started to shift. Little by little, she began dipping into my food. At first, it was just small stuff, like pouring some of my milk into her coffee or cracking a couple of my eggs for breakfast. But before long, it escalated. I'd come home and notice that full packs of chicken I'd bought had vanished, or snacks I'd been saving were gone. Even leftovers that I had clearly labeled with my name weren't safe. I brought it up more than once, but every time she brushed it off. Sometimes she laughed, saying she thought everything in the fridge was ours. Other times she acted like I was overreacting. Meanwhile, I knew exactly what I'd bought and what I was budgeting for. The truth is, I've been in a tough financial spot. My credit is a mess from mistakes I made when I was younger, and I've been working hard to rebuild. That means living on a strict budget. I don't go out much, I don't spend money on extras, and most of my meals are cooked at home. I literally count every dollar. Meanwhile, she works full-time, eats out constantly, orders takeout whenever she wants, and somehow still helps herself to my groceries. I tried talking to her more seriously about it. I explained how important sticking to my budget is, how I couldn't afford to replace food that disappeared, but she brushed it off again, rolling her eyes like it wasn't a big deal. That's when I finally hit my breaking point. One weekend, I decided to make a tray of brownies, but these weren't just regular brownies. I laced them with extra strength laxatives. I baked the batch, let them cool, and placed the tray neatly in the fridge, covered, looking like they were for me to enjoy later. Deep down, I already knew what would happen. Sure enough, she couldn't resist. She helped herself without asking, just like she always did, and the results came quick. That night, she was running back and forth to the bathroom nonstop. From the other room, I could hear her groaning, complaining about how she must have gotten food poisoning from some bad takeout. I kept my face straight, acted sympathetic, and even offered her some water. Inside, though, I knew exactly what had happened. The next day, she was still muttering about how unfair it was that her favorite restaurant had poisoned her. But I noticed something important after that night. The food stealing dropped way off. She still sneaks a bite here and there, but nothing like before. For the first time in months, I could open the fridge and actually expect my groceries to still be there. And the truth, I don't feel guilty. Not even a little. She had it coming. That's where this story finishes. That's one way to make a point. It's kind of wild that it had to get to that level just for someone to respect basic boundaries. The funny part is she probably still thinks it was just a random case of bad food. Some people only learn the hard way, I guess. This next story is about someone trying to sell cheap plants online, only to end up dealing with an entitled buyer who demanded more than she was willing to pay. I had a bunch of plants that I needed to clear out before fall. They weren't all going to fit back into my house, so I decided to post them on Facebook for $1 each. To make it fair, I even included rulers in the photos so people could see the exact size of the plants. 3 different buyers had already come by, and all of them were super kind. They even commented that my prices were way too low. One woman liked them so much that she actually paid me more than what I was asking. Then came the entitled buyer. She texted me early one morning, asking if I had anything left. I checked and told her I had 5 amaryllis seedlings for $1 each, and 10 more very small ones I'd sell at 2 for $1. She replied with, "I want $10 worth of plants." She was insistent about coming over right away, so I got them ready, gave her my address, and told her it was the White House on the hill by itself. When she showed up, she didn't even say hello before complaining. She looked around and said, "I was expecting greenhouses. I wanted to walk through and see everything you have for sale." I'm so disappointed. I motioned toward the box of plants I had prepared and said, "I'm not sure why you expected that. I told you this box was the last of everything I had left." She cut me off, almost shouting, "You are all over Amy's page." I blinked at her, confused. "Excuse me?" She leaned in, emphasizing each word. "You are all over Amy's page." I shook my head and said, "You must have me confused with someone else. I don't even know who Amy is." She got even more frustrated. "Amy? She runs the little plant shop. Everyone knows Amy." I told her again I didn't know her and wasn't connected to her page. Then I tried to hand her the plants she had asked for. She sighed loudly, muttered under her breath, and started whining about how small the seedlings were. I didn't want her to feel pressured, so I reached out to take the plants back and said, "You know what? If you're not happy, let's just call this off. I'd rather keep them than sell you something you don't want." She jerked the box back and snapped, "No, I guess I'll keep them." Then she smirked and said, "I only have $5. Keep in mind, she had specifically asked for $10 worth of plants. Now she wanted all of them for half the price. I smiled politely and said, "That's fine." She looked pleased, but then I added, "So which 5 do you want?" She froze, staring at me like I had just spoken another language. "What? I cut in with the same calm smile. "They're $1 each. So which 5 plants do you want?" She glared at me before finally saying, "I guess I'll take the largest 5. I pulled out the smaller ones and left her with 5 plants for her $5. I figured that was the end of it. But then she asked again, "You don't have anything else? Nothing at all?" I remembered one small begonia I had put aside and asked if she wanted to see it. I told her it was also $1. Of course, she said yes, even though she had just finished telling me she had no more money. I brought it out, and she immediately snatched it from me, complained about the size, and dropped it right into her box. That's when I reached in and pulled it back out. She gasped and demanded, "What are you doing?" I counted out loud, pointing to each plant in her box. "You gave me $5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 plants. That's what $5 gets you." She sputtered in outrage, then tried one last time to intimidate me. "I'm going to tell Amy how terrible you are." I just smiled, pointed toward the driveway, and told her that was the fastest way back to the highway. She stomped off, clutching her 5 plants like she'd been robbed. To this day, I have no idea who this Amy person is, but apparently she's the self-appointed guardian of all plant sales in the area. That's the end of this story. That whole thing is hilarious in the most frustrating way. Like, she showed up acting like she was at a garden center, not someone's driveway. The funniest part is how proud she probably felt trying to bargain, only to get cut down by basic math. And this mysterious Amy she kept mentioning almost sounds like some local plant cult leader. This next story is about a woman whose longtime friend suddenly confessed he thought he deserved to be with her, only for things to spiral after she gave him a blunt and honest response. So yesterday, one of my closest friends, let's call him Mark, asked me to meet him for lunch. We've known each other for about 10 years, so when he said he had something important to discuss, I figured it was serious. I had some free time, so I agreed and headed over. When I arrived, Mark was already there. We ordered lunch, sat down, and at first everything was lighthearted. We talked about random stuff, just like we usually did. But then he cleared his throat, and I could tell he was about to shift into something heavier. That's when he hit me with it. He told me he didn't understand why I was dating my current boyfriend, because according to him, he was a better match for me. I sat there stunned for a moment, not sure I'd heard him right, so I asked him to explain. Mark went on this long rant about how he liked me first, how he met me before my boyfriend did, and that somehow meant he should have been the one I chose. Then he started stacking up what he thought were his advantages. He told me he was more good-looking, taller, more successful, and that he knew me better. The successful part was especially off, because honestly, it's not true. My boyfriend works hard and actually earns his way. Mark, on the other hand, has his entire life bankrolled by his parents. But the way he said it, he really seemed to believe he was the better option simply by existing in my orbit all these years. Then he said something that really made me pause. He told me he couldn't understand how I could be with someone else when he'd always been waiting for me, like it was some kind of line I was supposed to find romantic. I just sat there for a second, letting it sink in, before I asked him directly if he wanted me to be honest. He said yes, so I laid it out. I told him flat out that I would never want to date him because of the way I've seen him treat his past girlfriends. He ghosts them whenever he feels like it, only to pop back in and expect them to be waiting for him. I told him I found that immature and irresponsible, and that dating him would feel exhausting. I also explained that over time, watching him treat women that way was part of why I had slowly started putting distance between us. I didn't like it, and it had changed the way I saw him. When I finished, he didn't argue. He just went quiet. Then he mumbled something about having to go, got up, and left. I went home afterward and carried on with my day, not really sure what would come of it. Later that evening, though, I started getting messages from our mutual friends. They asked me what I had done to Mark, saying he was a total wreck after meeting me. Apparently, he was out drinking and refusing to tell anyone what had happened. I explained to them what had actually gone down. I told them he confessed his feelings, and I told him honestly why I didn't feel the same way. But instead of understanding, some of them turned it back on me. They said I'd been too harsh, that I broke him, and that I could have let him down easier. From my perspective, though, I wasn't cruel. I didn't insult him or make a scene. I just told the truth. The same truth I've been holding back for years. I think he needed to hear it, even if it stung. That's where the story ends. That one's tough, but honestly kind of telling too. Sometimes when someone asks for honesty, they don't really want it. They just want validation. The way his friends are reacting makes it sound like they're seeing the drama secondhand and not the full picture. It's never easy being the one to say what everyone else avoids saying, but it usually ends up being the most real thing in the long run. Anyways, that's all the stories I have for you today, and I hope it was a chill listen. If you had a good time, dropping a like and hitting that subscribe button really helps me out. And as always, thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you in the next one.